for folks who need a seat and want to watch the proceedings. That will be in hearing room 5, but you are absolutely able to come in and testify on any of the bills that you choose to, even if you're sitting in hearing room 5. So don't think that just because you're not sitting in this room that you won't have an opportunity to come and share your concerns on these issues. You absolutely will have that opportunity. We are going to do these bills in by batches. We're not going to have separate hearings on each bill. So how we're going to proceed today is we have one bill dealing with state worker biweekly pay. We will hear that bill first. Then we have 3 bills that are dealing with some sports issues. We will hear those bills together. We have 3 bills dealing with medical procedures. We will hear those 3 bills together. And then we have 2 bills that are dealing with drag issues, and we will hear those 2 bills together. The ranking member and I have had a number of conversations today to try and set some rules for the road, to try and facilitate a good, productive hearing that respects everybody's time, respects the concerns of everyone involved, and makes sure that everyone has a chance to have their voices heard. So we've set some time limits for our discussion today in order to make sure that everyone who wants to be heard has an opportunity to do that. And here are the rules that the ranking member and I have come to an agreement on. The bill sponsors will have 5 minutes each to present their bills. Then each side on an issue is able to designate an expert witness or a lead witness, however you want to refer to that person. That person will have 5 minutes to testify. Then every subsequent witness will have a total of 3 minutes to testify. Members will have 5 minutes apiece to ask questions of the bill sponsors, and members will have then 3 minutes per witness to ask questions as well. And we will try to adhere to those rules best we can. We'll try to keep the hearing moving as well, however. Secondly, just on a personal note, I recognize that these are some incredibly challenging issues and a lot of very diverse viewpoints on them, a lot of passion on all sides on those issues. And I believe truly that every person in this room that we don't see eye to eye is doing what they're doing because they're trying to protect kids and do what's right for the folks of our state. So with that in mind, you certainly have my commitment as chair to provide an opportunity for everyone to be heard and facilitate a strong, robust discussion, but hopefully a civil discussion. With that, I'm going to invite Representative Griffith to come forward and present House Bill 131. Representative, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For those of you that were here last year, you'll recognize this bill as House Bill 2090. What happened with that particular bill was it came out of committee unanimously. And what this bill does is provides biweekly pay for our state employees. This bill was brought to me by Office of Administration to really try to make it more effective and be another tool that we can support our state employees on and to be able to give them 26 paychecks a year instead of 24. This bill, when it came to the House last year, we attached the tax refund to that bill. And although it went through, the governor vetoed the bill. So I'm bringing the bill back again this year because here in Jefferson City, the state employees make up the largest part of my workforce. I have over 14,000 of my constituents that live here in Jefferson City that work for the state. For many of you that live out of state, in outstate Missouri, and in the larger cities, you may not have as much contact with those state employees as what I do. But when I was knocking doors during my campaign, the thing that I heard most from them was we need to have our pay increased, we need to be able to have a voice, and we need to feel like we're appreciated. And so I think the things that we've done, and last year was 7.5%, and I think with the 8.7% we're looking at this year as far as an increase for them, I think we are addressing that. I think we're letting them know that they are appreciated. Many of them are public servants. They do this, and they could actually get a job in the private sector that would be better for them and make more pay. But because they are committed to serving the people of Missouri, this is one way that we can really show an appreciation for them. For those of you that looked at the fiscal note on this, there is a fiscal note. The fiscal note really reflects 1 year. If you look in next year and the year after that, and the year after that, there's none. This is really for data in updating the computer systems that we've got that move this from a 15th and 30th pay periods to biweekly to every 2 weeks. And so it's really non-controversial, and I certainly would appreciate the committee's support on this, and I would be open for any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions from the committee? Representative Meredith.
Thank you. First of all, just thanks for the bill. I think I supported it last year. There's a lot more I think we ought to do for state workers. This is a pretty tiny thing. But I did just want to ask, when was this bill notified to be heard today? Do you recall?
Last week.
Last week was the notice that this bill was going to be heard today?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Representative. Is there anyone here to testify in favor of House Bill 131? Thank you, sir, and proceed whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Garrett Webb, registered lobbyist on behalf of the active and retired Missouri state employees. We'll be brief. We supported this last year. In principle, it's a simple bill, just like they all start out to be, and obviously no fault to the chairman or of the sponsor. Last year, other stuff was attached and it got tied up. We know that this is not the solution to keeping the workforce. Certainly is an incentive for workforce attraction, and we would just hope that you would all feel the same and help our workers, as the sponsor said, get a couple more paychecks in a calendar year.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Is there anyone here to testify in opposition to House Bill 131? Anyone here to testify for informational purposes on House Bill 131? Please proceed when ready.
I'm Hannah Swan with the Office of Administration. I just wanted to go on record. I'm actually in support of this bill. Current statute allows state workforce to be paid either monthly or twice a month. It doesn't currently allow for biweekly pay, which really is the standard in the industry. We just would like to have this added so that we would have the flexibility to make that change at some point in the future if we wanted to do that.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else here to testify in favor of House Bill 131? Okay, seeing one. Proceed, sir, when ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'll be very brief. My name is Arnie C. A.C. Dinoff, State Public Advocate. I'm a citizen from St. Charles County. This was the only thing on the agenda up until yesterday when I looked at the committee agenda, so there's a huge crowd here. This makes common sense. It's fiscal responsibility. We have some struggling state workers out there, especially in the Division of Children and Family Services. That whole department, those people have master's degrees and doctorate degrees, and they're working for babkas. They're working for poverty wages. We have people at workforce development offices that are working for poverty wages. And I talk to people in the circuit clerk's office around the state, and they're working for, if you're there 25 years, you're making $32,000, and if you have a few children and not a spouse, you're on public assistance and food stamps in Missouri. And that's a shame. That's a crying shame. Missouri is 49 out of 50 states, and we may have now dropped 50 out of 50 states in terms of pay. Now, the benefits are pretty decent, and the pension is pretty good, but that doesn't pay the bills. This going to this new biweekly pay period will help out Missouri working families that work for the state. I supported this legislation last year. I'm not sure why it didn't get over the finish line and go to the governor's desk, but it's a pretty simple issue. I ask that you put this on the consent agenda to get it on the governor's desk as soon as possible. It only makes common fiscal sense, and I'll end there, and I'll entertain any questions if anybody has them.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else here to testify in support of House Bill 131? Seeing none, that will conclude the hearing on House Bill 131. Thank you, Representative. A couple more items of housekeeping I failed to mention in my introductory comments. For those of you who are here to testify on behalf, either for or in opposition to these other bills, there are witness forms on the witness table, and you'll need to fill out a separate form for each of the bills just to make sure that we have a record of your position on those. You'll want to make sure and fill out a separate form on each bill that you're testifying about. With that, we'll now move into public hearing on House Bill 170, 183, and 337. Representatives, proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the record, I'm 156th District State Representative Brian Seitz, and I bring before you House Bill 170, also known as the Save Women's Sports Act. This bill provides that for the beginning of each school year, a parent of a student 17 years of age or younger, or a student 18 years of age or older competing on an athletic team of a public or private school or public or private post-secondary educational institution shall sign an affidavit acknowledging the biological sex at birth of such student. Athletic teams designated for females, women, or girls shall not be open to students of the male sex. Mr. Chair, committee members, this is a matter of fairness. Growing up in the 1960s and 70s, I remember vividly the first co-ed gym class at my high school. Boys and girls were treated equally, trained together, and even competed against one another. Co-ed sports, often team sports, represented equality between the sexes. Those of us who participated in competitive organized sports competed based on our biological sex. In other words, the boys competed against the boys and the girls competed against the girls. It was fair and equitable. As we trained, knowing full well that we trained against our peers in the same age range and biological sex. House Bill 170 protects women and girls from being taken advantage of by men. The citizens of Missouri do not want their daughters, granddaughters, sisters, or nieces to be taken advantage of. Many athletes train for years to be involved in sporting events, competing against their peers. Women and girls have fought for decades for the ability to excel in their sports, and that ability is slowly being eroded as biological males increasingly continue to compete in women's sports. Within the next decade, we are in serious danger of having only men's sports and co-ed sports with no leagues specifically for biological females. Ask yourselves, is it fair that a biological male compete as a female to take away the hard-earned medal, trophy, or ribbon? Is it fair that biological males are taking scholarships from hard-working female athletes? And the answer is no. Look at these real-life examples. Leah Thomas, formerly Will Thomas, a swimmer for Penn, was the 554th ranked men's swimmer in the 200-yard freestyle, but the 5th ranked swimmer when competing against women. In the 500-yard freestyle, he was 65th against men, 1st against women. C.C. Teffler, formerly Craig Teffler, a former athlete for Franklin Pierce University, was ranked in track as the 200th and 390th amongst men 400-meter hurdles during the 216 and 217 season. When competing as a woman in 2019, Telfer became national champion. Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood, both biological males, came in first and second in the New England Championships for 100-meter dash, and Miller set the Connecticut State Open Meet records in the girls' 100-meter and 200-meter races in 2018. Those medals and those records that should belong to biological female athletes are instead held by biological male athletes. Girls' opportunities are being taken away from them by biological males. To ignore the competitive advantage that men have against women in many sports is to ignore biological reality. If our state legislature desires that all sports in the state of Missouri be declared co-ed, we should do absolutely nothing here today. We will then set aside women's sports, something that generations past have sacrificed to see come to fruition. Doing nothing signals that this legislature is okay having biological males competing as females, win all of the awards, and erase decades of female empowerment and hard-earned successes and sacrifice. Or, if this committee can still see that the physical, emotional, genetic, and biological differences between men and women, boys and girls, then we must pass this legislation. It's a matter of fairness. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and women deserve to compete on a level playing field. Allowing biological males to compete in women's sports destroys fair competition and women's athletic opportunities. The hopes and dreams of our daughters and granddaughters are being sacrificed at the altar of inclusivity because we are too afraid to speak out when something is wrong.
And thank you, Representative. Your time has expired, so I will now ask Representative Berger to present his bill.
Chair O'Reilly, Vice Chair Hicks, Ranking Minority Member Engel, rest of the committee, thank you for allowing us to present. My bill is House Bill 183. I'm Jamie Berger, House District 148, which includes Scott County. This bill defines sex as the two main categories of male and female into which individuals are divided based on an individual's reproductive biology at birth and the individual's genome. The bill prohibits public school districts and charter schools from allowing any student to compete in any athletics competition designated for the opposite sex. As determined by the student's official birth certificate, or if unobtainable, another government record. However, a female student may be allowed to compete in an athletics competition designated for male students if there is no such athletics competition for female students offered. The bill clarifies that biological sex is only correctly stated on birth certificates if it was entered at or near the time of birth or modified to correct an error. School districts in violation of this prohibition will lose state aid. This bill is similar to House Bill 337 in 2023 and similar to HB 2197 2022. Save Women's Sports. The law of Save Women's Sports, girls' sports, has been passed in multiple other states. There have been 18 other states that have enacted this same law, or various to this law. The states that have passed this include Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Mississippi, Montana, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia. This is the first law of its kind because it ensures that only biological girls can play in girls' sports. These 18 states are not going to be the last to pass this law. There are many other states that are also in the process of passing this laws or other laws that are very similar. Fairness is what keeps us coming up in every conversation, and this law is ensuring that girls will not have to be concerned about getting to play their game fairly. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And Representative Cook, please proceed when ready.
Is that yours? My name is Representative Benny Cook. I represent the 143rd District. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and everyone on the committee. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present this bill again this year. I am sponsoring House Bill 337, and basically this bill says if you're a boy, and that's what it says on your birth certificate, you will not play on girls' sports in K through 12 sports programs. Only biological girls will play on a girls' team. If a school allows a boy to play on a girls' team, they will lose state taxpayer funding. The goal of this legislation is to make sure that biological girls have fair access to scholarships and opportunities without having to compete against athletes perceived as having a biological advantage. Each year, more and more states are being proactive in introducing and passing legislation protecting our girls' sports. This piece of legislation has been introduced and discussed for several years in Missouri. Last year, it passed the House. We need to pass it in the House again this year, pass it in the Senate, and send it over to the governor's office so he can sign it into law. 18 other states have passed this law, banning boys from playing on girls' teams. It is now time for Missouri to pass this legislation to ensure our daughters, our granddaughters, and all girls continue to compete on a fair level with only biological girls. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee. Representative Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To inquire of the first bill sponsor.
Proceed.
Good evening, gentlemen. How many transgender children are currently playing sports in the state of Missouri?
I think the question is inferring that it may not be happening yet here in Missouri.
It's a clean-cut question. How many children are playing sports in the state of Missouri?
I can answer.
Identify as
I
being
do not
transgender.
know that. I do not know
Okay.
the exact number.
Okay, I do. I do know the exact number.
Sure, good.
And there are more bills filed against trans kids in the state than are currently playing sports. So I want to be clear about that.
What bill
Okay.
numbers are those that are
What-
filed
what
against
bill numbers?
trans? Yeah.
The ones that were heard in the Senate this morning and the ones in front of us, gentlemen.
Oh, I don't think we presented anything that would be a negative or against trans
Well,
athletes. This is a fairness
agree to
issue
disagree, and this is
for
my
women.
inquiry, so I'm going to continue to ask questions. Thank you.
appreciate that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Are you familiar with the MISHA policy for trans kids?
No,
play
I've
sports?
not looked at that. No.
Okay.
No.
Are you familiar with the NCAA standards for trans people to play sports?
Well, I'm talking about
No,
women's sports here
right,
in Missouri.
Right.
I
So
don't
the
think,
NCAA exists in the state of Missouri.
Sure, sure.
So are you familiar with their policies and how they govern the inclusion of transgender people into sports? It's a simple yes or no.
Men competing against women. I'm trying to define the question that you're asking.
No,
Are you talking
no,
about men,
you are absolutely using your
biological
own
men
language.
competing?
So the language within the NCAA
Okay.
defines it as transgendered people.
Interesting.
Yeah, I highly recommend you read it. Are you familiar with the Olympic rules, the World Olympic rules?
No, I'm not. No,
Okay,
I've not
so
studied
these
the Olympics.
three-
I watch them, though.
Right.
I enjoy the Olympics.
They're great. And
Right,
they
yeah.
have figured out how to include transgender people into sports in a fair and equitable way. So
Outstanding.
we've got these three sports governing bodies, none of which you've read any of their rules and regulations,
Uh-huh.
who've found ways to fairly and equitably include transgender people into sports.
Men competing against women or boys competing against girls. Is that what you're asking?
Okay. I think I've been clear. So we're going to move on to my next question. You stated that your bill's intention is to look out for women being taken advantage of by men.
Absolutely.
Let's get into that. What does that mean? Because you said it multiple times that was the intent of your bill.
Sure. I think in competitive sport, I was a wrestler in high school. I would wrestle against someone not only of the same gender, though I do know that there are co-ed wrestling meets and so forth, but in the same weight class. I
Right.
wrestled 112, 114. I could
Right.
not go against a heavyweight. I would be destroyed.
Right.
I think it's the same within boys competing against girls. Biological males would have an advantage in many instances in sport.
And so
against girls.
when
And I
you
just
say
think it's a
taken
matter of
advantage
fairness.
of, what does that mean?
Taking advantage of the situation and the modern political climate.
Taking
that
advantage
is-
of by winning.
Right, by
match?
taking a medal away or a first place
Okay.
from a female. I don't think it's fair that a biological
Okay.
male takes that away from
What would you
a
say
girl.
is the purpose of sports?
The purpose of sports?
Mm-hmm.
There's a competitive nature to sport. I think any athlete would tell you the purpose is to win.
Ooh. I mean,
If you're playing sports
even as
and
a
you're not
Kansas
playing
City
to
Chiefs
win,
fan,
you're not
like
playing
I would
sports.
say that, what we've seen over the last couple weeks in the NFL has shown us that sports really transcends all of that. I don't know. Did you watch the Bengals-Bills game?
Oh, absolutely.
Not
Yeah,
not
I
the
watched
most
them
recent
all
one,
this
the one
weekend.
from a couple
Yeah,
weeks ago.
I watched them all this.
Right.
I really watched
the
the
one that
Kansas City
united
Chiefs
the
game.
world for a common goal.
I saw that.
Okay.
Yes.
So the game was canceled, and it was possibly the most powerful game that anyone had ever seen.
Right. The power of prayer was evidenced, and I think that's a very important thing.
The power of
that
medical
even
science
in
was, too.
sport,
Okay.
athletes can gather to pray for one another's health. I think
Sure.
that was a wonderful
Well, and if
situation.
they do that of their own volition, I support their First Amendment right to do it.
I do, too.
And their First Amendment right not to do it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Outstanding.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to inquire of the next bill sponsor, please.
Proceed, Representative.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Good, ma'am. And you?
Good.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with the very beginning of your bill when you talk about there are only two biological sexes. Are you familiar with the term intersex?
No.
Well, you're about to be. Okay, well, thankfully, there are some professionals in the room that are going to help us out here because I am not a medical professional, but I am aware that there are different genetic and physical makeups that happen when children are born, and that for centuries, really up until the last couple of decades, when there was ambiguous genitalia or there was ambiguous DNA, a parent and a doctor, or just a doctor, made that decision and determined what that child's gender was, what their biological sex was. And I think you were probably on the floor last year when I explained that ambiguous genitalia can take many forms. It can also be internal reproductive organs that you don't really know about initially. And so I'm gonna ask you again, what happens to those folks who fall in the gray area?
When I answer your question, I'm just talking about my bill, boys playing and girls sports.
Right, but your bill defines biological sex as simply two. And what science and nature shows us is that we are not that easily divided into boxes.
Well, I'm going to defer to the bill clarifies that biological sex is only correctly stated on birth certificates. So whatever the birth
Except for when there's a mistake.
When there's a
right?
mistake, exactly.
Right. And so can government documents be incorrect?
I think everything can be incorrect.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I please inquire of the next bill sponsor?
Proceed.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Oh, I'm just great. How you doing today?
I've been better.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
What are we protecting girls' sports from? You said multiple times that you're protecting girls' sports. I wrote it down.
Well, let me refer to my notes. Just a minute. I can read you what I
Perfect.
put on there. Just give me a minute.
You don't remember what you're protecting women's
I
sports
just
from?
want to make sure we clarify this. You asked a question. I'm just trying to clarify
Okay.
it for you since you asked me about it. So the goal, you're talking about this legislation that I have, correct?
I'm talking about the direct statements you made about 7.5 minutes ago.
Let me read it to you again. Let me read it to you. The goal of this legislation is to make sure biological girls have fair access to scholarships and opportunities without having to compete against athletes perceived as having a biological advantage.
Okay. And so I still don't know what we're protecting girls' sports from because it's certainly not predatory coaches, is it? Or is that in your bill, gentlemen?
I can read this to you again if you need me
Okay.
to. the
So
goal of this
I'm
legislation.
gonna move on because
me to read it again?
I'm gonna
I can read
reiterate
it again.
This is my inquiry,
Okay,
gentlemen.
go ahead.
Thanks. So I'm going to reiterate a question that I posed to the earlier bill sponsors.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the MISHA policy for inclusion of transgender folks?
I looked at it briefly. I mean, I can't recite it.
Okay.
If I have it here, I could read it for you if you want me to. I mean,
No, not
Okay.
asking that, but you're not familiar per se.
well, I've looked at it. I've glanced at it. I've looked at it.
Okay. Are you familiar with the NCAA's policies?
I can talk about this bill with you if you want me to.
No, that's not the question I
You want
asked.
to hear about this bill?
I'm familiar with your bill,
Okay, well, I
gentlemen.
can
This
read
is
it
the
for you.
second time I've heard it.
I can read the summary.
Okay,
or I
are you
can read the
familiar with the Olympic Committee's
I can
rules
read
and
the
regulations?
legislation in this bill for you. I can read what I
Okay.
just read to you. I could read that again if you like.
Okay.
Whichever you want me to, but I can read this bill.
So
if
you
want.
named 18 states.
I don't
that have these
those
policies.
states, but I can find those for you and get those to you.
Did you or did you not claim 18 states?
Yeah, there are. I found
Okay.
those. I don't have them listed here, but I can get
Okay.
that to you if you want.
Well, I believe the gentleman before you quoted them.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't quote those for you. But I can read the bill if you need me to read the bill for you. Do you need me to read it for you, or? I'm just asking.
Are you
if
going to
want.
continue to be disrespectful like this to everyone in the room?
I'm just asking if you want me to read the bill for you.
So I want to point out that these 18 states also happen to be the poorest in the country. And I don't know that there's a direct correlation there, but I wouldn't doubt that this type of bigotry that drives corporations out of our state when a time where we are celebrating economic growth and trying to increase economic growth. And so I wondered if you thought that there was any correlation there.
I'm not sure exactly the question you're going into, but I can read the bill.
Do you
for
want me to say the question again slower?
I can read the bill. I'm not sure if you're implying something there. I hope you're not, but I can read my bill for you. That's what we're here to discuss. I can read the bill.
We're here to discuss the implications of your legislation on the people of the state of Missouri. And I am saying directly to you that there's a direct correlation between archaic, bigoted policies and the poorest states in this country. That is what I'm saying to you. And I'm saying that this type of legislation will decrease economic growth in this state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Baker. Proceed when ready.
To inquire, Mr. Chairman.
Proceed.
So a couple quick questions for, I don't know, I guess it really don't matter which one of you. Let's go with Representative Seitz. So just a couple quick questions, yes or no answer will probably be sufficient. Do you think that that sports authorities such as the NCAA or any other unelected organizations should have the authority to redefine what it means when it comes to biological sex?
No.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that they could possibly be compromised for political purposes?
Yes.
No further questions. Thank you.
Representative Quaid, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brief inquiry, please.
Proceed.
Good evening. So this is not the first time we've been here. All three of you have presented bills before similar to this. In fact, I believe I sat in this exact same seat last year with this angle, with the cameras there. We've done this all before. I have a general question for all three of you. I know last year I asked you all about the MISHA policy. We asked you about the definition of intersex. And last year, and probably the year prior and the year prior, you all said you hadn't read it yet, that you didn't know, that you were unfamiliar. My question for you, as the elected officials who are filing legislation to change the law in our state, why would you not do the research that your colleagues asked you to do when you couldn't answer the questions last year?
Representative, to answer that question, this is my first year that I have presented that bill. I think you're speaking of Representative Basie, who was termed out.
I apologize to you, sir. The other gentleman, I know we've had this discussion before.
You know, I haven't read the NCAA policy at all. I have read the MISHA policy, and I feel like my bill just directly involves boys and girls sports, and that's my idea of protection or competition to be fair. And that's what my bill, I fall back to on my bill.
Gentlemen, Mike, specifically to your bill and the exchange that you had with the ranking member was about the definition of intersex. And I know that that's been a discussion before.
Right. I still will revert back to birth certificate at the time.
Okay. Representative Cook, do you have an answer to why you've yet to read the MISHA after we've asked you about that before?
Yes, and I have glanced over it. It's something where, you know, I'm looking at, I don't really know, I understand they are the governing sports body. We're talking about schools here, and so basically what this would impact with schools. And
The governing sports body for K-12 schools.
Yeah, we are discussing, what I'm saying is we are discussing how this will impact schools, yes. But I have glanced at it, and I can read it for you if I can try to find it.
I have read it many times,
Okay.
gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
The point is that you have not. And if I may, just, Mr. Chair, for the committee as a whole, I would encourage us as elected officials, if we are intending to change the law in our state, to do the research and to read it, what currently exists, what currently governs our state and the people of the state before we try to change it. And especially when your colleagues ask you these questions and ask you to do that research as the bill sponsor, I would encourage you, regardless of the topic, to do your due diligence before you present a bill to a committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Lavasco, proceed.
Thank you. So we've got two bills that are very similar, one that's a little different but goes on the same track. One thing that all of them have in common, that all three of you have mentioned in one regard or another, is the desire to make a distinction between biological males competing and biological female aligned sports. I'm curious why no distinction the other direction? Is there not concern that there would be a similar disparity between women competing in men's events in the event of, say, gymnastics or other areas where women might have an inherent biological advantage over men? Why the one-sided approach? And that's a question for anyone.
Right. Thank you, Representative. I think for myself personally, what I want to do is protect the integrity of women's athletics. I think that's the group that is currently at risk. Now, if a female desires to participate or compete against a male, that is a totally different subject as far as my bill is concerned. I'm concerned about protecting our daughters, our granddaughters, nieces, and so forth against unfair competitive advantage by having to compete against a biological male.
At our local high school, they offer boys football. They don't offer girls football. One of the girls went out for the boys football team, which was allowed, and I think it's okay if she decides to play that. I don't think she has an unfair advantage over a biological male.
Isn't that rather subjective? Depending on the task or the particular type of sport, is there going to be a different set of skills that may or may not involve biology that might be relevant? Isn't that something we should consider when we're drafting legislation?
Mine is just trying to create fair competition and not have unfair competition by boys into girls sports.
And then I guess last question, I noticed two of you three, I can't be sure about you, Representative Cook, but I noticed two of you have corrective lenses. It occurred to me that there might be an inherent biological advantage for someone who does not require glasses in certain sports over someone who needs a correction. Why don't we look to perhaps segregate those types of competitions as well to make it easier for people to compete? How far do we take this concept to create kind of safe areas for people to compete with those that are most like themselves? At what point is that no longer competition? I struggle with that myself, and I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are.
I just kind of think that's far-reaching outside the scope of what the bill is. I think the bill is just boys playing in girls sports. I think we can exploit it however much we want to and take it to whatever end we want to, but if we just keep it simple, we just don't want boys playing in girls sports.
Representative Cook, do you have anything to add? If you don't, that's fine.
I don't have anything to add, unless you need me to add something.
Okay. Yep, that's all good. That's all I have here. Thank you.
Representative Weber,
Thank you. To inquire.
proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, gentlemen. So we've been here before, time and time again. I was just wondering, because every time we do this, our committee hearing fills up. Look at all these people. We have 2 hearing rooms. So my question is going to be very simple to all of you. Since Representative Berger, Representative Cooks, you've done this before, and Representative Seitz, I want to know what your thoughts are as well. Have you had discussions with any of these kids back behind you? Because they've been flooding the Capitol. So have you had any conversations with them? Offline, in person, after the bill hearing? Have you had any discussions whatsoever to maybe fully understand what your bills have in there since? Go.
No one has came by my office. No one has contacted me. Even after last year or the year before that, No one has contacted me.
Have you tried to reach out to them?
I don't have their contact numbers. I don't have their phone numbers. If they want to send me an email, I'm more than happy to have them come by the office. They can come by and talk. We can sit down and talk about the situation. But nobody's called me. Nobody's emailed me from the past couple of years. Now, on other bills, they've contacted me, and they were upset about some situations. But nobody has contacted me on any of this, wanting to give me their side. And, I mean, I don't know if there's kids in here that are whatever's going on. I don't know what they're doing, but I don't know if there's kids in here or not. I don't know. I don't see.
I see a lot of kids.
Okay.
And Representative, there are a lot of kids testifying at the last hearing too, if you remember.
Yeah, but none of them contacted me. Just so you know, just want to let you know that.
All right.
Being a first-timer here presenting this bill, I have not been contacted. I was in my office approximately 4 hours today and readily available with the door open. So I've not been contacted by anyone wanting to discuss women's sports or the unfairness of a biological male competing against a female.
Oh.
No, I have not.
So, and you didn't think that you should reach out to maybe Promo or somebody to have conversations, maybe, to understand why this is such a big issue and why maybe it's not just boys and girls playing boys and girls sports?
Last year, after the committee hearing last year, I had a lady from St. Charles reach out to me that's a friend of my niece, and we probably had about an hour-long conversation on the phone. And when we kind of parted ways, we agreed to disagree, but that's the only conversation I've had.
And so I have another question for y'all. So you keep on saying that you're trying to protect women. Okay, protect women from what?
Unfair competition.
Is that the answer across the board?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think it's a matter of fairness. Should our daughters, my granddaughter was born yesterday, should she, when she grows up, be forced to compete against a biological male despite maybe years of training for a specific event? Is it fair to women to have that gross disadvantage while competing against a biological male? So I think all three of these bills are very pro-women, they're pro-girls, and if anything could be said, maybe we should have someone here, a biological male, saying that he's being discriminated against because he's not allowed to compete against women. I just want to protect women in sport, and I think this is a way to do it. And none of these bills provide any harm to anyone. None of these bills stop anyone from participating in an athletic event, be it a co-ed event or some other event that they can compete in based on their biology. I think this is a pro-women's bill. I think this is the feminist bill that they wanted in the 1970s, and we're giving it to you now. We're going to protect women.
Okay.
I agree here. We're here to protect the women and protect girls' sports so they can have a fair spot at getting a scholarship, that opportunity that's entitled to them with girls' sports. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's real interesting. So I knocked a lot of doors this past election cycle. A lot of doors in different districts, not like mine, which is very blue. A lot of moderate and red districts. And you know what women told me that they were worried about and concerned about? It wasn't women's sports. It was daycare. How am I going to pay for groceries? How am I going to make rent? Reproductive health care was number one. Sexual abuse, rape, equal pay. All of these things are things that women have an issue with right now. This is not it. Thank you, gentlemen, for wasting our time.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Reuter.
To inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you. Representative Seitz, you mentioned that there are 18 states that have enacted this. Can you tell me what those 18 states were again? I just wanted to jot those down.
I think that was Representative Berger who mentioned the 18 states, and I'll deflect the question to him.
My apologies. Thank you.
Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Mississippi, Montana, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And so, you know, I'm new to this legislature, and from my own personal experience, I have been to some of these states, and I wouldn't characterize them as the poorest states in the nation, especially states like Texas and Arizona, Florida, Utah. But I will look into these and further, but I appreciate you giving me that information.
Thank you for your inquiry.
Oh, one other question, sir.
Yes.
Does your high school have volleyball?
No, they do not.
They do not? Okay, thank you.
Representative Ani,
Thank you. To inquire.
proceed.
So I've heard a few times today and over the past several years, we've heard bills like this a lot. I've heard the phrase biological advantage. And I would love to hear from each of you what biological advantages you have over me.
May I answer that question generically without comparing a biological advantage that I may have over you? Because I really don't know you that well to declare a biological advantage. Do you play ping pong?
So
I'm
that's
really
interesting,
good at ping pong.
gentlemen.
I'll give myself a biological
Are you
advantage.
saying then that we should maybe be looking at competition on a case-by-case basis? Like maybe we shouldn't generalize?
Interesting. I think that men's bone structure is more dense, their musculature is stronger, and they can, for the most part, run faster, jump higher, and even lift more than most females. So
I've met
again,
some women who could dominate you in all of those
I
things,
bet
sir.
you they could. I bet you they could, and they can have at it too, because I've retired. But the bottom line is we want to protect women and girls in sport to this unfair biological advantage. Don't you
okay.
consider that just unfair?
Absolutely not, and this is my inquiry.
Interesting.
So I would like to know, because my understanding of biology, which I'm not a doctor, men and women, of course, are biologically different in different ways. We can acknowledge that. We can also acknowledge that it's not just men and women. There's a lot of gray area, a lot of in between there. But men can't produce another human life. Women do that, right? We have that biological advantage.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not just biological advantages that men have over women. So why are we only protecting women?
We're talking about sport. All three of these bills deal with sport and an equitable, fair playing field for
Based on
women
the
and
assumption
girls.
that men are biologically superior to women.
In some sports, that may be the case.
Says who? Is that your opinion?
No, I think biology declares that. Yes.
Okay. thank you.
I would have to look at the records involved in sport to see who has the major records, the fastest race, the most lifted, and so forth. So
I'm done with my inquiry. Thank you.
thank you.
Representative Meredith,
To inquire.
proceed.
Thank you. Struggling to figure out where to start. I get a little frustrated with this conversation. We had it last year. It feels sometimes pointless because I gotta admit, listening to the inquiries, it feels like a lot of the questions you're not even bothering to engage in. Questions that we asked you about, a couple of you, about last year, and the answers still aren't there. But I'm going to try anyway again. Do any of your bills, any of the three of them, acknowledge the existence of folks that don't fall neatly into one biological sex or another?
Mine does not.
Mine does not.
Mine does not either.
Without taking that time, do any of the three of you acknowledge that there are folks that don't fall neatly into one category or the other?
I don't think that deals with this legislation.
It does. It does.
How so?
Because this is a question of where kids should fall when they're playing sports.
I think it's a question
what
of
league
fairness.
is most appropriate for them? And what about what's fair to kids that don't fall neatly into one category or another?
Sure, we're
What's
not
fair to them?
prohibiting anyone from competing in sport. I think we would agree that sport is character building, it's physically important, and I think everyone should participate in sport to one level or another.
I'm really glad you said that, because I think that's, when the question was asked earlier, what's the point of sports? Especially when we're talking about youth sports. It's not about winning. That was the answer I heard you give earlier.
Absolutely.
It's about opportunity to play, opportunity to experience the exercise value, the social value, the competitive value, the teamwork, all of the things that go into sports, right?
Well, I think high school sports are about competition and are about winning, and I stand firmly on that.
It's not about the opportunity to play and compete?
Referring to ranking minority member Ingalls, she asked the question about the player that got hurt for the Buffalo Bills. When he woke up, the first question he asked was, did we win? Did we win? That's what he said.
That's a professional sport. Do you understand there's a difference between that and youth sports?
She asked that about Representative Seitz. She asked that direct question, and that was his response.
So are you all now disagreeing with what you just said, Representative Seitz, that it's also about an opportunity for all of these kids to participate in these important developmental opportunities?
Sports can be multifaceted, but the goal is to win.
Wow. Okay. What is the point of women's sports being a separate league?
What are you asking?
Why is there, if it's just about winning, why is there a separate league for women?
So that they might compete fairly one against another and not have the disadvantage of competing against a biological male.
Yes.
It's a matter of fairness.
Okay. So if it's about fairness to each of these kids to have a place where they can play and compete to win, if somebody doesn't fit neatly into one category or the other, is it not the responsibility of the folks designing these sports and policies around them to try and figure out where best to put that person so that they also have that opportunity to, sure, compete and win?
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Okay, do you acknowledge that there are people that don't fall neatly into one category or the other?
I think all three of our bills deal with saving women's sports.
You're not
And
answering the
that's
question.
That's
not
the
answering the
point we're
question. Do you
attempting to
acknowledge
make.
that people exist that do not fall neatly into one category or the other?
I acknowledge that people exist, and I acknowledge that biology dictates, as well as heredity.
Do you know what intersex
sex.
is? That question was asked earlier.
I have no idea what that term means.
Do any
I
of you?
have no idea what intersex means. No.
I asked two of you last year, and the answer was no. Did you look it up? Did you listen to the experts that testified? Did you hear about people that don't fall neatly into one category or the other? Or did you just close your ears? Because the problem is, if we're trying to make it where people have an opportunity to compete in the place that best suits them, we have to accommodate a lot of different type of people. And if our leagues are designed to differentiate based on sex, well, that differentiation is also based on reasons. Those reasons include a lot of things like muscle mass and hormones, and a lot of things that are associated with puberty. And so we have the entities who have spent a lot of time researching this complex question, learning about this complex question at the Olympics, the
Representative, I'm sorry
NCAA.
to interrupt you real quick, but I just need to ask the audience to please not approach the witness table. Apologies, Representative, please proceed.
Thank you. We've got the NCAA, Misha, the Olympics, who have spent time actually digging into these questions, listening with their ears open to people that are complicated, to children that are complicated, and coming up with policies that try to, in a nuanced way, understand those differences and give people an opportunity to play. Do you think that they might know things you don't when you can't even answer the question what intersex is? That might mean maybe nuance in the policies makes more sense than you all dividing it into two categories and saying we're done?
No.
Ignorance wins out. A choice not to listen.
I don't think anybody's being ignorant here. We are listening, but don't say ignorant here.
Can you answer any of those questions that we keep asking you?
There are boys and girls. That's what there are.
This is the problem. You're not actually listening. That is willful ignorance. That's the definition. We've got experts getting up and talking about these complex situations and kids that aren't what you want to define them as. But you're not listening. It was asked earlier, do you think NCAA policies can be compromised by political motives? And the answer you gave was yes. Do you think politicians can be compromised by political motives?
Absolutely.
We've heard a lot about protecting our daughters and our nieces. I want to say I've got 3 daughters. I've got nieces. I've got a lot of friends with kids. I've got friends with trans kids. I care about protecting them too. I am far less worried about my girls growing up in a world where they might have to compete against kids that are trans than I am about all the other things you've talked about today. But I'm also more concerned about them growing up in a world that's just going to close their ears to information and facts and focus instead on fear and hate and bullying for the sake of political motives. Thank you.
Additional questions from the committee. Representative Hicks.
May I inquire?
Proceed.
So I just have one question for you, and it's in regards to actually the penalty provision under House Bill 183 and House Bill 337. I just want to know if there's been any research done into how the impact of losing state funding for a violation of these provisions would play out.
I have not done any research into that, no.
Would it make any sense to, instead of the way it's written right now, it has language shall, which standardly is interpreted as, and it's a must provision within law. So my question is, wouldn't it make more sense to maybe have a penalty and then a stepping stone to eventually get there, compared to it seems like you just lose all state funding?
We can definitely look at it and discuss it.
Okay.
I think as we move forward, I think we'll roll everything into a House committee sub, after this committee hearing and after we go back and kind of talk about our aim and direction, and that might be something we could look at also.
Yeah. No further questions.
Additional questions from the committee. Representative Myers.
To inquire.
Proceed.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Were you aware, we've heard a little bit about the difference. You guys were talking about high school sports and younger sports here in the state of Missouri, correct? We've heard a little bit about Olympic committees and NCAA. Do these apply to that?
I think my bill does apply to collegiate sports, and that's something that we will talk about as we formulate the committee sub to see how far we go with that.
Okay. I was just looking at a little bit of data, and I'll ask you if you knew this or not, but this is 2 years old. But if you take pole vault back in 2015, a 15-year-old boy won his category with a personal best of 5 meters and 5.3 meters. And the women's world record at the time was 5.06 meters. And in 2017, there was a 16-year-old boy that ran 100 meters in 10 seconds and 10.15 seconds. And while the current women's world record was 10.49, were you aware of that?
You know, there's a lot of statistics out there like that. The boys cross-country champion, individual champion in 2022 was from West Nottoway. It was 16 minutes, 28 seconds, point 20. And the girls was 20.38, 20 minutes, 38 seconds. So we see those disparities in boys and girls sports all the time.
All right, thank you.
Additional questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Yes, Representative Crossley.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm new at this, so I'm going to bumble through. Are you aware that the second leading cause of death in youth, ages 10 through 24, is suicide? Are you aware of that?
I have been told that, yes.
Okay. Do you know the rate of suicide consideration among LGBTQ youth?
No, I do not. But I don't know that we're talking about LGBTQ youth because we're talking about boys playing.
The T in LGBT is trans, and we're talking about trans students being able to compete. So we are talking about
in
LGBT
sports.
youth. Yes,
in sports.
correct. The rate of LGBTQ youth seriously considering suicide is 45%, so 1 in 2. And research shows that's because of things like this, of bills that target them, of stigmatization. And so no matter what, no matter where anyone in this room falls on this issue, I hope that that would be our number one concern, is preserving the life of
Well, they're still allowed to play sports.
Sure.
Along their biological line.
What increases
along their biological line.
What increases their consideration or even attempt of suicide is when someone doesn't affirm their gender. That's what increases the risk even higher for trans youth than.
Yeah, now we're getting outside of what our bills say, I think.
We are talking about trans students competing in sports.
We're talking about trans students competing in their biological line in their sport.
Right, so we are talking about trans students, and so we need to keep in mind that when we talk about them, when we don't affirm their gender, when we stigmatize them, I think of the parents that I met at doors and the fear that I saw in their eyes because of us in this building.
What did you say?
When I was going door to door for my campaign, and I would ask, what's important to you? I think of the fear in parents' eyes in my district who feel like their children are being targeted by us in this building because of policies that want to define things in a very narrow way that isn't in step with what we understand about everything.
Well, and then I'll kind of just make a statement too. When I went door to door in my district, this is important to the people in my district.
Right.
They feel like we need to have a dividing line between men and women's sports, boys and girls sports. So I think that could be everywhere, no matter what door you knock on.
Different districts that we represent. But I would just ask of you and of everyone on this committee that we keep in mind that rates of suicide and mental health issues that LGBT youth experience is because of policies like this. And so let's keep that in mind as we move forward. I have no further inquiry. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you for presenting today. We will now go into the witness portion of the hearing, and the way we'll do it is we'll do, if you're in favor of the bill, if you are the expert or lead witness in favor of the bill, I'll ask you to come forward and testify at this time. You will have 5 minutes. After that person has completed testimony, the lead witness or expert witness in opposition to these bills can then come forward and have their 5 minutes. So, lead witness in favor of these bills. Or if there is no designated lead witness, if there is someone in favor of the bill who wants to come forward and go first, floor is yours. And Mr. Secretary, please proceed when ready.
Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Ranking Member, thank you. I'll go quick because I know there are a lot of people here that have things to say, those that agree and disagree with me. I'm here to protect women's sports. It's been mentioned before that really before I was alive or...
Apologies. Would you mind stating your name for the record real quick?
I'm very sorry. Jay Ashcroft.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Here to protect girls' sports, women's sports. 40, 50, 60 years ago, there was a discussion about the disparity in sports and the ability for women to participate and to grow and be the best that they could be in ways that sports helps women to do that. The science is clear. I'm not saying that men are superior to women, but genetically, men, as has mentioned before, have a better bone mass. They generally have stronger muscle mass. They are generally faster. They're generally taller. Obviously not in my case. I'm a father of a 10-year-old girl. I want to make sure that she has the opportunity to compete and be the best that she can do and compete in a somewhat a fair arena. One thing I would mention is if you actually read the bills that were presented, none of these tell anybody they can't compete. Whether you're male, female, or as intersex was brought up, those bills just say that women are only allowed to, or women's sports are protected to make sure that women have the ability to compete on a fair playing field. But they can, as necessary, compete in men's sports, and everyone else can compete in men's sport. You know, I think there are a lot of people that have very emotional responses to this, and I understand that. But I think it would help if, I don't think anybody in this room, the people that I agree with and I disagree with, I don't think they're here because they hate anybody. I think they're here because they are truly concerned about making sure that everyone can compete, and we do that in a way that actually works for everyone. I don't know if it's wrong to say this or not, so please stop me if I shouldn't. I'm going to obviously answer any questions you have. I'm not going to take up time on the other bills because other people want to do it. I also like the idea of protecting children from irreversible operations that they may later regret when they're adults. Hey, that's their decision. And I also like the idea of protecting children from what most people would consider inappropriate adult content, at least while they're children. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. I will open it up for questions. As a reminder to the committee, each committee member will have 3 minutes for an inquiry. Representative Baker.
To inquire. Proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quickly, Mr. Secretary, you have been all over the state, correct?
Yes, sir. I visit every county in the state. Yes, Representative. I visit every county in the state every year.
I know you've been down to my area. I've seen you in other places all around the state. So I would say you'd have a pretty good judge of talking to people just about the issues of the day. Would that be correct?
I am willing to talk to anybody.
Yeah. So in that, some of the things have been brought up here that people bring this legislation for their own personal reasons or whatever it might be, and not because they're an elected representative of a district in this state. And I take exception to that because I think we're all here because we were elected by those people in our districts, and you've been to a lot of those districts, probably all of those districts. So what are you hearing from people when it comes to this issue around the state of Missouri?
Obviously, it does vary. There are districts that disagree with me vehemently. I would suggest that from what I'm hearing, most districts agree that we need to make sure that we do protect women's ability to have sports. That's what I hear.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Representative Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to inquire.
Proceed.
Good afternoon, Secretary.
Good afternoon, Representative.
What is the job of the Secretary of State?
I try to provide leadership for the state. I try to move the state forward in a way to create opportunity for all Missourians.
Are your official job duties election-related or sports-related?
I have all sorts of different. Do you want me to go through all the things that are enumerated by statute?
What in your official job responsibilities constitutes you as an expert witness, particularly with these 3 bills? Are you an expert in sports? Are you an expert in transgendered people? Are you a doctor?
Well, actually, I have a daughter. I have 3 sons. I actually am an engineer with multiple degrees. I'm also an attorney. Actually, I would put up my criteria, my educational background with anyone else on this committee.
Perfect.
Lady.
Are you familiar with intersex people?
I'm familiar with the term.
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually ask people I meet whether or not they're intersex.
Right.
So I can't tell you if people are, but yes, I've heard that term.
We typically don't ask people their genders when we interact with them, do we?
Generally, no. Generally, there's an assumption that you can tell from looking at them.
Right. Okay. So because you are the expert, have you read the Misha policy?
I didn't claim to be an expert, but thank you.
I mean, you did put your degrees and your acumen against everyone on the committee, so I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
So please share with us why you think Misha's policies are inadequate to deal with transgendered folks playing sports.
Because they are not making sure that there's an appropriate venue for women to compete against women to compete against women because of the biological differences generally between men and women.
Okay, but you are familiar with Misha's
I
regulations?
have looked at it, yes.
Okay, are you familiar with the NCAA's?
A little bit, yes.
Okay, and where do you disagree with theirs?
Put it simply, I think that especially at that level, women should be protected from men competing in their area. When you're talking, first graders, kindergartners, second graders, there actually could be biological advantages for women. You generally have more co-ed teams. But yes, at that level.
So at that level, I mean, and I'll have to look at these because there's 3 of them, but some of these don't differentiate between K through 12 and older. So it doesn't address prepubescent youth and pubescent
Well,
youth.
I think it says, I assume you've read the bills, but most of them talk
all
about
3 are different.
designating if there's a sport for women, a sport for men, and of course they also talk about co-ed. So they do actually take care of that if you've read the bills.
Okay, so would you say that we need to differentiate as early as kindergarten with sports?
I think you could make an argument depending on the sport, whether or not that's beneficial. I think it's a little bit more of a question whether or not you need to do that at the kindergarten level. I mean, you frequently see kindergarten level kids like playing soccer the same. You generally don't see a big difference in the...
And you generally don't see a big difference until puberty, is that right?
I think that's fair to say, although, I would say so.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Additional questions, Representative Velasco.
To inquire.
Proceed.
Good afternoon, evening.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
I just want to clear a couple things up for the record. The folks presenting this bill did not designate you as an expert witness. You just were the first person to stand up. Is that right?
I was willing to testify, yes.
Very good. And you're here in your personal capacity, not as your role of Secretary of State, right? And you are allowed under the First Amendment to have a opinion on all of these things and present them as yourself, and that's your right. Correct?
I think 2/3 of this committee would agree.
All right. Well, that's all I got. I just want to have that on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Additional questions, Representative Quaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To inquire, please.
Proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, I guess. I don't know what time
Good
it is
evening,
anymore.
lady.
Hello. I'm thankful Representative Lavasco asked the question about your official capacity because I'll be honest with you, Mr. Secretary, I was surprised to see you here. Traditionally, when you come into this building to testify, what types of bills are you here for?
Elections bills have been big the last several years. Done a lot on, I present my own budget. This year, been doing a lot with truth in sentencing and special prosecutors because the problem was brought to me by some prosecutors last year. Been working a lot with regard to foreign ownership of land with multiple senators and state representatives. Also have been doing some things with libraries, trying to protect children and make sure that parents have the right to information to make choices. ESG, to make sure that individuals know what's going on. Notary, we did electronic notary law. I've testified against prevailing wage legislation. I try to be active in all ways that I can to make the state better for the people of the state.
Do you think historically, or I mean, you've been around a long time, historically, do secretaries of state testify on things beyond their wheelhouse in terms of election law? I know the libraries fall under, but there are specific duties that your office holds. Is it the norm, I guess, in your opinion, that we see secretaries come to testify of things outside that scope?
Well, I think in the last 6 years, it has been the norm to have a Secretary of State that would try to do the best he could for the people of the state. They pay me. I'm going to give all I can to make the state better for them.
So prior to you, however, do you think were secretaries doing this?
I think you and I probably have a disagreement about how good a job the Secretary immediately
That's
prior
not my
to me
question,
did.
gentlemen. I'm just curious of what is just interesting to me, I guess I will just say from my experience, secretaries of state generally focus within their wheelhouse when they come to testify. The same as we see the treasurer will come and testify to the budget committee and talk about things within his purview. So it's just interesting to me that you are here. And I guess I would just add to that, we've seen you send letters to we all are very familiar with the letter that you sent to former Senator Blunt
Yes.
regarding the marriage law that they had discussed. And so it just is interesting to me.
Are you trying to say that I lose my right to have an opinion about
Absolutely
things that
not.
aren't part
And
of my
that's why
job?
I mentioned, I'm thankful that Representative Lovasco asked that question. One question that was brought up, and I know that you were sitting here the whole time, was the conversation around Misha being bought out and politicians being bought out, and where folks are saying things. I guess my question for you, Mr. Secretary, is can you commit to us that this won't be used in any sort of campaign for you? That this is truly about personal as a father?
What I can commit to you is that this is the way I've always felt about it, and we wouldn't even be here talking about it if people on your side of the aisle weren't using it for political purposes, lady.
Our side of the aisle is not filing legislation, Mr. Secretary. We're here because folks on your side of the aisle are filing these bills time and time again. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any additional questions? Representative Meredith.
Thank you. Hi. Good evening. So follow up to that. You've testified on a lot of election bills.
Yes,
That's
sir.
pretty common. Have you ever testified on any bills about addressing sexual assault?
I don't think so. I don't remember your side of the aisle being against protecting
Have you ever testified
survivors
on
of
any
sexual
bills?
assault.
Have you ever testified on any bills about addressing sex trafficking?
I don't think I've testified. I've actually talked to the Attorney General and other people about it, but yes.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because seeing you here today, on a rare time testifying on a bill that's not about elections, because you're worried about protecting our daughters, do you think that trans kids playing girls' sports is a bigger threat to our daughters than sexual assault or sex trafficking?
I think that this is an issue that is a problem and that it is not being addressed appropriately. I think there's a lot more momentum to support survivors of sexual assault. And since you bring it up, my office actually runs the Safe at Home program. So I guess when I was working on Safe at Home legislation,
We're here though
twice,
talking
I
about
have
the times
testified
that you
with
step
regard to that.
outside of what your office does
to
testify here.
I just
on
forgot
what
that I
we're
had
doing.
testified on it, so you probably want a different example.
It's just interesting to me where your priorities seem to be. And what it suggests is that to that earlier conversation about whether the NCAA is more likely to be driven by political motives or whether we in here are, the simple fact that you're here testifying on this as the only bill I've seen you in here on other than election-related bills suggests to me that this is really about political purposes more than anything.
The record should show that you actually have seen me testify on budgetary matters, and I have testified with regard to sexual violence at least twice because we had 2 bills passed on that.
Budgetary matters about your office. Again, we're talking about things your office does. And as established, this is not in the realm of what your office does. And here you are anyway. And on what other issues have you stepped outside of what your office does to be here to testify? I'm seeing you here, and that suggests maybe it's actually about the fact that you're running for governor. Thank you.
Additional questions? Representative Copeland.
Thank you, and I just want to reiterate what Representative Lovasco said. You're here in what capacity?
I came here myself, and I've testified on all sorts of things throughout the years.
So I just want to clarify that to the committee and witnesses, that the last discussion was pointing that he was here as a professional or a political person. He's here as a dad and has a daughter. I just want to point that out. So thank you.
Additional questions? Representative Vani.
Thank you. To inquire.
Proceed.
Good evening.
Good evening, lady.
Do you see the room filled with people behind you?
Yes, and there's an overflow room.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Lady.
My only question to you is your platform as Missouri's Secretary of State and potential gubernatorial candidate so small that you had to be here to express your opinion on this issue ahead of all of the public that came here, that traveled from across the state to be here?
Well, lady, if you're worried about time, then why didn't you just let me get done with my statement and allow other people to talk? You're prolonging the time.
This is my inquiry, first of all.
Well,
And
I'm
second of
answering
all,
your question, lady.
I'm going to move on. What I think is absolutely insulting beyond what this exchange has been so far is that there are folks in this room that have traveled across the state to be here. They have taken time away from their jobs, from their families, to be here to tell us how this works. Now, I understand you haven't served in the legislature, so what we do here is we let Missourians come and give their opinions on legislation. You have avenues to talk to all of these folks. You have avenues to get your opinion out into the media,
Just like
into
you
social
could come to
media.
my office to talk to me instead of taking up their time, lady.
Yeah, no, that is the problem here, isn't it? Thank you, sir.
Before we get to any questions, I would ask for audience members to please keep outbursts to a minimum and allow the conversation to take place undisrupted. With that, other questions from the committee. Representative Mattison.
To inquire, Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
All right. Mr. Secretary, you said you're an attorney, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to pose this to you as in your capacity, your legal mind.
I'm not giving you legal advice. You're not my client.
All right. Because in the state of Connecticut, there's an active court case in the Second Court of Appeals where some biological females have sued because they were competing against biological males in their high school athletics. Now, I have no idea how that case is going to play out. But how will that ruling in the Second Circuit affect the state of Missouri, or will it?
The Second Circuit isn't precedential value over the state of Missouri. It could be persuasive, but it's not controlling unless it were to go up to the United States Supreme Court.
All right. However, the absence of any actual legislation setting forth what should happen is what caused this legislation need to be filed in the first place, right?
I believe so.
So if we don't act as a body to set this policy, we're setting up the women of this state to have to file similar suits if they get in the same position.
If you don't pass policy, then the state will look outside of the state to determine policy as opposed to letting Missourians decide it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, at this point, we're going to move on to the next witness. We have a lot of folks who want to testify tonight and a lot of ground still to cover. So I would ask for the person who is either designated as the lead or expert witness in opposition to the sports bills to come forward. You have 5 minutes. Please proceed whenever you are ready.
They turned off the mic. Hello, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Justice Horn. I use he/him pronouns, lifelong Missourian. A little bit about me, grown up in Kansas City metro area, have played football, 6A championship in 2012, 2014. Also wrestled, played track and field, and also would go on to compete in the NCAA to represent the state of Missouri and South Dakota. Outside of that, also have the privilege of serving as chair of the Kansas City LGBTQ Commission, as well as board director of the Jackson County Children's Services Fund. On top of that, I speak here in opposition to these 3 anti-trans bills today. Why I do that is, in 2012, I grew up in Green Valley, had the opportunity to go to middle school there and, really try to fit in, not only as a person of color, but as someone who is finding themselves in their sexual orientation. That spring, I would try to take my own life. My parents found me, and thank God I wasn't successful. That led them to then take me out of the district from Green Valley and take us to Blue Springs, where the only avenue for me to fit in was to play high school athletics. And for me to be able to fit in and, be where I am today. Why I stand against this bill is because we are taking that from so many trans kids. And we are moving heaven and earth in this government for not even trans kids. We don't get past 10, 2 hands. And we're moving heaven and earth to let it be known that this is where we stand on the issue. It was also, brought up, this is sports, especially high school sports, is not about winning. I've won. I have 2 state rings from this football, what I did in football. But it is about developing and ensuring kids have a place in their high school for them to be successful adults in the future. It was also stated, that this is to save women. I mean, you can look no further than last session to, that is just not a right statement to say that these bills are to save women, because it sounds like we're in favor of women athletes having autonomy over their bodies, but it sounds like it stops when they want to make reproductive decisions. So I stand against this bill. I open this up to any questions. I have lived experience. I'm a member of the LGBT community, high school athlete, NCAA athlete, and I'm open to any questions this committee has.
Questions from the committee? Representative Matthiesen.
Hey, thank you. I just have a clarifying question.
Yep.
Because I don't fully understand what the actual scope of the impact of this bill will be. We've heard from the ranking member that there's more bills filed than there are people that this will actually affect. You use the term so many to emphasize a large number of people will affect. Help me understand, how many people will actually be affected by this legislation?
So per MISHA policy, there were 5 trans athletes in the state of Missouri, and that's even pushing 10, based on if they have went through the healthcare avenues and they are, in that new standard. So we are, moving heaven and earth for 5 trans kids. And it was brought up by another committee man. There's a Trevor project that came out that just the simple rhetoric in this movement, impacts LGBT youth. 84% of those youth will think that not being alive is better than being alive, just from this conversation in this committee. So it is, 5. It's not an urban issue or rural issue. I don't think folks...
Thank you for actually putting a number on it, because I was unaware. Thank you.
Additional questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We will now move back to those in favor of the bill. Next witness, you have 3 minutes. And please do remember, everyone, to fill out a witness form on all of these bills that you want your testimony to be recorded.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Gore with Concerned Women for America, and I'm here to testify in favor of these bills. I'm a retired teacher. I'm a former coach, a former athlete, all-around sports enthusiast. I would like to say, as a side note, high school sports, if you're a coach, you want to keep your job. In most places, you need to win. The greatest blessing in all of my sports has been being able to watch my daughter compete at the collegiate level. Many hours were spent on the golf course, on the practice range, traveling to tournaments, etc. So I just think, for my side, I would like to say, thank goodness I was young enough to benefit from Title IX. I can't imagine a world without being able to compete in sports. So I was thankful for that. But from a parent's viewpoint, because my daughter's a better athlete than I ever was, I just think it would be devastating to invest countless hours, months, years, as we did, into the development of your daughter's athletic career. And when you get to that level, it is about winning. To see it all diminished on the spot because the scholarship she doesn't get. The first place medal, she doesn't get. Even the 5th place spot on the varsity golf team, she doesn't get. We want to talk about fairness, and it's certainly not about wanting to hate anybody or keep anybody. But is there any time maybe where the needs of the many have to outweigh the needs of the few? I don't know. I just looked it up. It says that experts estimate that 1.7% of the population are born with intersex traits. 35% of females ages 8 to 18 compete in soccer, 26% in basketball. The gentleman said, according to Misha, 5 trans kids in the state. And I understand that, and I understand that's his heart, and that's where his heart is. But we also have to have a heart for those females who want to compete. And it is just about fairness. My husband and I love to watch basketball. We have season passes up at Truman State. When we're up there, we go watch the women's basketball and the men's basketball. Nobody can sit and watch that and not see that there's a difference or an advantage. Those men jump higher. They move faster. They're stronger. They dunk it. I'm sure there are females somewhere who can dunk basketball, but I haven't seen it in person. So it just seems to be, it's about fairness. It's not about protecting women. It's about protecting our ability and our right to compete in sports on a fair playing field that was guaranteed decades ago with Title IX. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and questions for this witness. Representative Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To briefly inquire.
Proceed.
Good evening, and thank you for coming to testify.
Thank you.
I, too, am a mother, and I have a little boy and I have a little girl. And my son is not an athlete by any means. That's of his choice, and despite me trying to convince him otherwise. My daughter, however, wants to play everything, and she is a very avid gymnast. And so I understand also as not professional by any means, not even very good, but I also played basketball for several years. And so I too would be heartbroken if one of my children was denied the opportunity to play a sport, just like what you said. And that's why these bills scare me, because that's what these bills are doing. They're not including people, they're excluding people. They're saying these type of children can't play with these other type of children. And you were describing the competition, and I'm really glad you did. I'm a very competitive person, as most of my colleagues know. Would you say that that's the primary goal of sports as a former coach? Is to win?
It depends. Now, I used to be a sports director at our local YMCA before I went back into teaching. And so we had youth sports programs, co-ed youth sports programs, and those were to build the character traits.
So were those the only ones that built character traits, were co-ed teams?
No, no, not at all.
Exactly.
But when you reach that certain level, it is about competition, and it is about winning.
So
and
I understand that
the reason I'm here is you said you're afraid these bills will exclude people.
Right,
I guess
they will.
My fear is if we don't have something like this, from the statistics I gave, more people are going to be excluded.
They're going to be excluded from what?
Females from sports.
How are they going to be excluded?
Because they could.
Can you show an example of a woman losing a spot on a team in the state of Missouri?
But you see, you want to ask people statistics and put them on the spot.
No, I asked you for an example.
But we can see where it's going. Do we ever pass legislation?
But we're doing this proactively.
Because we can see. Yes, I don't have any granddaughters yet, But I certainly don't want them to grow up.
Do you know of any
can't
trans
compete.
athletes playing women's sports at MU, Missouri
No,
State?
but have you, that's what I wondered earlier. Have any of you talked to any female athletes?
Yeah,
who maybe
I have.
feel threatened?
Yeah. No,
or who
actually,
have
like one of my best
lost-
friends was a
who have
Division I
lost
basketball
their
player.
spot on a
No,
team, though.
I haven't.
See, so I haven't
Because-
talked to a trans athlete, but you haven't talked to any female athletes.
Actually,
who have
ma'am, I
lost
just
their
said that I
spots,
did.
Who have lost their spot.
Because we just said that you couldn't name any. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can you name any?
Representative Baker.
To inquire, Mr.
Proceed.
Thank you. Just real quick. So she's, the previous person was asking the question of an example, right? So I'm a father of 4 daughters. All 4 of my daughters are good athletes. They play volleyball. And I can tell you that if it becomes an issue where it's a more regular occurrence where men or biological males are playing in women's sports, I would, as a father, because I care about my kids and because it would be concerning to me for their health because of injuries of people who are very stronger than them, I wouldn't be able to allow them to play. So that gives you an example of, I think, what you were asking for, of the situation where they could lose the opportunity to be able to compete in that kind of a situation, simply for the fact that I care about their safety more than I care about them playing sports. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions, Representative Quaid.
Thank you very briefly, Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
Hi, thank you
Hi.
for being here.
Thank you.
Did you say the statistic was 1.7%?
That's what I saw. Some people mentioned lower, but
Okay.
that was one of the higher ones I saw.
Thank you, because I didn't know it, so I appreciate that.
So I thought I would be safe and go
Yeah,
with the
that
higher.
totally makes sense. And so I appreciate that number. But what I just want to kind of present for discussion or for thought for the committee, and as well as yourself and folks who are listening, you kind of, it seemed to me that you were presenting that as, it's a small number, and so creating legislation or not creating legislation, and I believe you said for the many versus the few is kind of a concept.
Mm-hmm.
For just informational purposes, about 1.7% is how many kiddos we have in foster care in our state.
Mm.
And as a mom, myself, I know a lot of us are talking about our parenthood here, I feel like 1.7 is a lot of kids that we should be paying attention to in the foster care system. And we do spend a lot of money working to try to protect those kiddos and get them what they need. And so I would counter and say, I do believe that we should be looking at our federal or our state policy and what we're doing in this building, even when it is such a small number.
Okay, I agree. It seems to me, and I'm not a politician, that we like to switch things up. What are we talking about? I thought we were talking about girls' sports.
And
I
I
understand
appreciate
your
that.
point.
I just think it's
I understand
for
your
discussion,
point.
because it was your point that we should.
But what
I'm
about
just
the
utilizing
35% who play basketball?
Absolutely, and we could say the same for the other children who aren't in foster
So
care and where our money's going. So
yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up as a point. So thank
Well,
you.
I think it's an interesting point. I don't think it was applicable to what I said, but interesting point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? I'm going to call on one more rep, and then we're going to move on. Rep Mathieson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Part of your testimony, you mentioned that you benefited from Title IX. I wasn't alive in 1972. Can you help me understand why Title IX was important to begin with?
Well, because we got to play sports. And, I never really stopped to think about it, except my husband is older than me, and he has 2 sisters that are about 10 years older than me, 12 years older. I'm 59. They never got to play athletics in high school. My husband has all these great stories about athletics that he competed in, as do I. And it was because of Title IX.
So Title IX was what got women ability to play sports.
Yes.
So how in 51 years, since 72 to now, did we go from actually as a nation trying to protect women in sports and get them into sports to trying to protect men in women's sports? How did we get there?
I don't know. And I'm wondering, where are the feminists? Where are the people who fought for
Thank you, Mr.
the rights? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition to the bills, please step forward. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Quentin Lucas. I'm a husband, a father, and I serve professionally as the mayor of Kansas City. Hearing the earlier conversation, I too am here in my personal capacity, although being the mayor of a city with 508,000 Kansas City, Missourians rather, is what gets me to care about the issues before us today. There are a number of different things that I wish to say. First of all, thank you all for your service. I guess I'll also note, because everybody's talking about their sports prowess, while I did make the state track and field championship, I came in very last place. And even though I came in last place, I gained a great deal, even though I did not win. There are a number of different reasons I'm here today. A few of them I'll note, and certainly I'll stand for questions. One of them is very simple. The back and forth with the gentleman who was in opposition who spoke first isn't about 5 children, although those children are important. It's instead what Representative Crossley shared. We deal with a high number of suicides, of trauma, of depression for our trans children in Kansas City and in Missouri. And fundamentally to me, that's in many ways all that we need to discuss today. I understand that people are trying to balance equities in any number of things. But when I look at the children in this room, and you can see them, look past me, I want to make sure that they have a place where they feel welcome. I want to make sure they have places where they don't feel like they need to hate themselves, to feel marginalized, to feel like there is no reason to be alive. And that's what happens with legislation like this. That's what happens when we tell them that they're wrong, that they're a mistake, that God didn't put them here for any purpose in the same way that he did for all of us. And just a few other issues, I'll note this. We have been very lucky in Kansas City, and I recognize you have 2 pictures of my beautiful city on the wall. Thank you. And I will note this, that we've been able to welcome professional women's soccer, who, by the way, are some of the best athletes in the world. They have not asked us for this bill. We brought a World Cup to Missouri. They have not asked us for this bill. The NCAA regionals will be in Missouri. They haven't asked us for this bill. There will be a very big NFL game this weekend in Kansas City, in Missouri. They have not asked us for this bill. Let us compete as one of the best places in America to live. Let us compete as one of the most welcoming places in America to live. And let us compete as a place where everyone is truly welcome. That's what I ask for me, for my constituents, for my child, and certainly for all of the trans children in the state of Missouri. With that, I welcome your questions.
Questions from the committee. Representative Baker.
Yes, to inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming down, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I was also a mayor in a former life, so I understand what it is to make tough decisions for your people. And I would say that you would venture to agree with me that those decisions are not always easy. Correct. And as a mayor, do you always have 100% people that agree with you?
I rarely ever do.
I would say that that's the case as well.
Right.
So understanding that there are different opinions on this subject would be something that you would agree that is a part of public policy.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it's important to frame this from the perspective that as public servants, we're all trying to achieve what we think is right for the people that we serve, correct?
I would absolutely suggest that. Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the motives of the representatives that are here today are pure, and that we are trying to represent the people that we were that elected us and that we represent. So one further question, just real quick. So is this the first time you came to testify on bills down at the legislature?
This is not my first time.
It's not?
Not even today, actually.
Not even today. All right. That's great. Well, I appreciate you being engaged. It's important that we are engaged on the issues of the day. And the thing that concerns me is that, though this issue is very controversial, it's still something that the people are asking to address. Would you agree to that?
I can't speak to that. There's no one in Kansas City who has asked me to address this issue.
No one.
No one has ever asked me to make it harder for trans children to compete in sports.
Well, I think
in
that's
Kansas City.
It's a little bit of a disingenuous to make it harder. I'm saying, has anyone ever asked you to address the issue of sports when it comes to biological differences and that separation?
They've exclusively asked me to oppose such efforts, including business interests in Kansas City.
Okay. I'm just curious. So in Kansas City, as I understand it, the crime rate is about 4 times higher. You're about 4 times more likely to be a part of a violent crime than the national average.
That's right.
So, that's an issue that I think is pertinent that we be engaged in as well. Would you say that's correct?
That's absolutely right. The bill I testified to this morning actually gave more resources to our police department to help fight that crime rate, and
I appreciate
all of you
that.
will be in support of that as well. It's something we're very cognizant of.
That's exactly what I was getting to, more resources for the police department. So thank you. I appreciate it, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Additional questions, Representative Engel.
Yes, Mr. Chair, to inquire.
Proceed.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
As someone who represents a large chunk of Kansas City, it's an honor to see you here. Were you involved at all in us passing the bill to bring the World Cup to Kansas City?
I'll give respect to everyone in the legislature for doing quite a bit of work to pass it. However, certainly was part of the bid and discussions.
Right, including our current floor leader, I believe, was the bill sponsor.
That's correct.
And I believe that a large part of that discussion was not including anti-trans legislation in order to make Kansas City a popular place to bring the World Cup. Do you recall that?
You are correct, Representative, yes.
Okay. And I believe that, I'm sure they will again, but our chambers of commerce, our business leaders for our one of the economic engines of the state of Missouri, testified repeatedly to that as well. Do you recall that?
That is correct, and I understand they'll be testifying again today, Representative.
Excellent. And so do you worry about the economic impact of bigoted pieces of legislation such as this being enacted in the Kansas City region and the effect on businesses and the economy?
Yes, Representative, and that's based upon what I've heard both from businesses in Kansas City and leagues and others that look for events in Kansas City.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir, for your testimony today. Next, in favor of the bill, please step forward. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Stacy Shore. And first of all, I don't see this as anti-trans. I see it as pro-woman. And the reason I say that is much like this witness, I was a part of a basketball team that won 2 state championships. I was a 2-time all-state athlete in the state of Missouri. I was an All-American, and I competed to the point that basketball paid for my college. It did the same thing for my daughter. She went to college on a basketball scholarship. So when we talk about being, anti-one thing, this is pro-woman. I can tell you a story about my own daughter who scored over 1,000 points in her career, an excellent basketball player. But one day when they were practicing for district play, they were practicing against the freshman boys. Now the boy that she was practicing against was not even her equal, but he was bigger, he was faster, and he was stronger. She went up to shoot a shot and she broke her hand. She had to have surgery on her hand. It ended the rest of her season, her junior year. She came back to play when she was a senior, but she could compete to have her college education paid for. The reason I feel strongly this is a pro-woman issue is that men are bigger, faster, and stronger. I am a part of a football family in Missouri that is prolific. One of my family members is in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. We are very competitive. My daughter would have loved to have played football. Her grandpa is a football legend in this state. But to protect her, because there are biological differences undoubtedly, my husband would not let her play. Why? Because it was too dangerous. So if we're going to have an honest conversation from a woman, I'm not anti-trans. I am pro-woman being able to compete on a level playing field. I want women to have the ability to earn a college scholarship based on their play. I have a son who just signed a letter of intent to play college football. He is 6'4", all-state. He is not a good basketball player. But if I were to put him up against my daughter, who was excellent, he would annihilate her in the same sport. Because again, he is bigger, he is faster, and he is stronger. I do think, I mean, it's not saying that men are superior to women. That's not what I'm saying. I come from a time in the late 1980s where girls did not get the same practice time that men did, the boys team did. They got the bigger gym until we won our first state championship. Title IX means that you have to offer the same sports opportunities to girls as you do boys. You have to give them the same opportunity for scholarships. That's what it means. I'm grateful for that. I am grateful for the men who brought forth this legislation because it is truly a pro-woman bill, and I am pro-woman.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Next, in opposition to the bill, please step forward. Proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Cooper, tonight representing the great city of Kansas City, as well as the Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. And don't know where to start, but I'm going to try. A few weeks ago, I was visiting one of your colleagues who is not on this committee, and I asked him, congratulations, how are you liking it? I said, what's your priority? And he said, I was out door to door a lot, and he said, I heard a lot about this trans stuff, these boys playing in girls' sports, and he said, people are worked up over it. And I said, really? I said, do they know any trans people? And he said, I didn't even ask them if they knew any trans people. And it took me back to a time in my life where a lot of you probably weren't even born. And I was talking to an acquaintance, and I made a derogatory comment about homosexuals. And he said, Shannon, you know any homosexuals? And I'm like, nah, I don't hang around those kind of people. And he said, you ought to meet my son sometime. He's a good kid. Wow. After I pulled my foot out of my mouth and I apologized to him, maybe I started growing up a little bit, and I realized it is easy to pick on people that you don't know because you don't know a thing about them. And it is easy to marginalize a group of folks out there that are just trying to fit in. And there's not a lot of folks out there, and I can tell you, they're not winning all the races. They're not taking the scholarships away from your kids. There might be 10 who are going through the MISHA process right now, which is fair and understanding. And for years and years and years, our public schools have figured out how to accommodate almost every type of situation there is out there to help kids want to learn, want to get educated, but most of all, want to fit in. And that's what this is really about. They're not taking your scholarships. They're not getting free rides to college. They just want to survive. They want to play a sport that makes them feel good and helps them build those friendships. And while we sat here and talk about this, I did a little research last night, which is very rare for me. But if we're going to have this meeting next week, same time, you know what's going to happen in our state? Between tonight and next week, 11.5 Missourians are going to be murdered. 242 of your constituents are going to file for bankruptcy. 23 Missouri citizens are going to overdose on fentanyl. And 8.5 babies are going to die. And we're spending a lot of time tonight picking on some kids that just want to fit in. And I hear the buzzer, Mr. Chairman, and out of my great respect for you, I will stop and answer any questions you might have for me.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee. Representative Meredith.
Thank you. Inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for being here again. I've really appreciated what you've brought to this conversation last time you were here and this time you were here. Both times talking about a fairly plain experience of bullying and how this feels like we're just kind of picking on kids without much value added, if any, and potentially a lot of really negative consequences coming from it. But I just want to be clear, like, you're here for the Chamber of Commerce, right?
I'm here for the Kansas City business community, yes, sir.
You're not here just as somebody who is looking out for kids.
I am probably the most unlikely child advocate in this building.
Trust me, I think we were all shocked to see you here last time.
And quite frankly, I enjoy beating up on them more than I do defending them, so.
Well, and I just want to say I appreciate that apparently not just you, but what the business community is sending you here to say is actually at the heart of this about us leading with empathy and understanding and open ears and not leading with fear and ignorance and bullying.
You know, there's a reason Kansas City is thriving and doing as well as it is, and it's because the business community welcomes everybody, and it is a welcoming place, and if you haven't been there, I invite you to the Super Bowl parade we're going to have in a few weeks. So, but yeah, it's the numbers I read off proved all of us, and Representative Baker had a great point about violent crime in our city. I mean, we got a lot of real issues to tackle out here, and in my world, this isn't one of them. It's just not.
Yeah, so I hear that. I want to also ask you, though, about the negative consequences of us doing this, because it's not just that this shouldn't be a priority, which I think a lot of us agree with you that this ought not be a priority. But of course, there are a lot of things we do that maybe are small issues even that we address while we're handling big issues. I guess what I want to hear is, are you also looking at, and is the business community in Kansas City looking at the real world consequences from an economic standpoint of legislation like this?
Every time we even have this discussion, there is a group of potential employees who won't come here because they feel that Missouri is a bigoted and backward state. And it's just, that's the appearance we get when these things, when we have hearings like this. And yeah, it hurts us. And we all know, I don't care what line of work you're in, there's not enough people out there to fill those jobs. I think our last numbers was 85,000 job openings in Kansas City. And quite frankly, most of our employees don't give a hoot about your sexuality. They want you to show up on time, do a great job, represent their business well. But when things like this happen, folks don't come.
Okay. I was at a birthday party this weekend with some close friends of mine who are going through a complicated experience with a trans daughter and exploring what that means as she grows up and how they address it going forward. But they asked me the question, am I going to either be made a felon or be forced to move out of this state this year? And I wonder how many people in our state will leave, will not come here, how many businesses will choose not to come here because their employees feel the same way. Is that the business interest in testifying against this?
Of course.
Thank you.
Additional questions, Representative Levasco.
To inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you. So you started off your testimony telling a story about you talked to a rep who'd been hearing about this issue quite regularly and thought that it was something that we needed to address. And then you went on to say that you don't believe that this is a major priority for the legislature, that there are bigger things that we should be looking at. And I think I would agree that there's a lot of things on my list that I would have taken up well before this issue. That being said, you can't deny that this is something that a lot of constituents across the state feel very strongly about on both sides. I guess my concern is I feel like I'm hearing from you, and we've heard from some other folks on this committee, this concept that even having this discussion is harmful, and that it either hurts the economic prospects of the state or some people maybe would think that we're targeting them directly, which I want to say for the record, I don't feel that is what we're doing here. Wouldn't you say that regardless of whether this legislation moves forward or not, that it is a healthy thing for us as a legislature to be debating complex and controversial issues and analyzing them in the public sphere rather than hiding from the things that people think, whether it's popular or right.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, and maybe the only part where I could say I might be an expert is I've sat where you all have sat, and I spent 8 years there, and I realized a lot of times when constituents would call and be upset that you spend 5 or 10 minutes talking to them, they figure things out, and you say, do I need to go forward? What can I do for you? And you're like, you know, Shannon, I just appreciate you picking up the phone and talking to me, and maybe that's not such a big issue. I'm not afraid of having this argument whatsoever. I don't know that it's healthy. I do know that it's hurtful for a lot of people. There's a lot of people in this room that it is hurtful to, but I think it's my job, it's Nancy's job as we represent the city and the chamber to let you all know what the business community feels like. And there's a lot of issues that we put ahead of this issue.
And I guess the last comment, and you can respond if you like, but you suggested that perhaps folks that feel strongly in support of this bill ought to talk to some trans kids to kind of get that perspective. I think one of the fantastic things about having this hearing is that that's an opportunity that we're going to have. And we're going to hear from people that generally are not necessarily representative of the average constituent that you might get to talk to on a door knocking expedition. And that's part of what makes this process so important, is that we can hear those voices on both sides in a way that we would never get just checking our email or otherwise talking to people one-on-one back home. So I think that's a positive thing. I'd like everyone, regardless of how they feel about this issue, to recognize that, and that open discussion is the most important thing. And I hope you'd agree with that.
I do. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Additional questions? Representative Ani.
Thank you. To inquire. So you mentioned that between now and when this committee execs next week, some things could go on, statistically speaking.
2020 statistics, I left that out.
Okay,
2020.
fair. I want to add another statistic to that. Between now and next week, assuming this committee execs in 7 days, 24 Missourians will take their lives. And the point I want to make, to the gentleman's point a moment ago, is that yes, of course, a legislature is here to debate important issues. But what we're not here to do, and what our constituents did not send us here to do, is to determine who is a whole person in our communities and how we treat them. I can't help but think of the kids who don't even want to play sports, but are struggling with who they are and how they present themselves to their classmates. I can't help but think what these headlines do. I can't help but think what it must be like to be going through adolescence, and on top of that, to feel so alone and so ostracized that an entire legislature is debating whether or not you should have the opportunity all of your classmates have. How harmful that is to a kid's mental health. And what we're not talking about enough today, in my opinion, is exactly that, is exactly those kids. We're sitting in this room today because there are some adults who don't understand some things and they're upset about it. But the reality is there's a whole world out there of children who just need loved, and they don't need us to argue about their existence. And I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Additional questions? I'm going to do one more, and then we're going to move on. Representative Myers.
Good evening. Thank you for coming over, Mr. Cooper. Had a couple questions. So you represent the business community in Kansas City, and you said that should legislation just dealing with kids' sports is what we're talking about,
right?
That would deter people from coming to Missouri for tourism or just to come to Kansas City in period, right? That's correct. Do you keep track of other sister cities in different states?
No.
So you're not aware of like how Nashville is booming, their economy's taking off.
I enjoy going to Nashville. I have
So
a
you've
good
been
time
there
there.
personally?
I've been there too many times.
Yeah, too many times. So, but Tennessee has this legislation that we're talking about.
Without a doubt, there are numerous states that have passed similar legislation to this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I like Houston, San Antonio, because Texas has it. Florida, Arizona with Phoenix, those states have this legislation already. This protects females in sports, right? But they are doing as good, if not better, than Kansas City.
I'd say nobody's doing as good as Kansas City.
I understand that may be a biased opinion, but that was all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Next, in support of the bill, please step forward.
Hi, Lisa Panette. And I came before the body at the very beginning of session because I wanted equality, as you know, and I wanted both sides to be able to have a voice, one of 163, and that's Republicans and Democrats. So I actually stood in the gap even for Democrats, even though I am a hard right Republican and identify with that proudly. I'm coming here today to speak as a grassroots mom, and there are many, many of us out there, grassroots moms, very different from the chamber, who now speaks on behalf of woke corporations. And the grassroots moms like myself who have 3 daughters that some of them, play sports and some of them don't. But there's one right now that, like the representative, she's about ready to play volleyball. And they don't have enough players for that specific team. So she came to me and said that they're talking about having boys. She's 15. They're talking about having boys on the team. I said, if that is the way that it ends up with boys on the team, you won't be playing. It isn't about whether you identify as trans or not. It is the simple fact that boys are stronger and girls get hurt. So none of these boys are identifying as trans. They're just boys. But my daughter won't be playing with boys. And what you see in the schools right now are a bunch of moms that are up in arms because they don't want their girls hurt. And when we talk about Title IX, if it was the point where the girls, like if we're talking about girls protecting girls in the sport, why, when they set up Title IX, didn't they just put them in with the boys if there's no differences? There's a reason why there was a separate category for the girls. And just because we become woke doesn't change the facts. It is what it is. Boys are still boys and girls are still girls. Period, the end. You can call it whatever you want, but boys are boys and girls are girls. And this is a big issue across the state of Missouri. That's it.
Thanks for your testimony. Questions for this witness, Representative Meredith.
Yes.
Hey, nice to see you again.
Yeah, me too.
I wish that maybe we didn't disagree this time since we were on the same page and it was nice a week or two ago.
But I did represent everyone, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
No, I appreciated that. Yeah. Since we've had a dialogue, I did want to go ahead and engage with this conversation a little. First of all, with volleyball, are you opposed to co-ed teams too? I misunderstood that.
If someone wants to participate on that, but I don't think that it should be forced. If you have girls teams and girls to be on those teams, but they shouldn't be forced to be playing with boys, period. And so if you have a separate category, it should be that separate category. And even if there's, boys that identify as girls or the other way around, then I think you set up a separate category, just like when girls entered that category, that there was a separate category for themselves. Instead, they weren't put in with the boys.
Okay, let's stop there because a couple things. First of all, I thought I had heard you say if it was a co-ed team or no team, then she would play on no team. But I guess that's not what you're saying.
No, that's me as a parent because they didn't have enough players.
Gotcha.
So if it wasn't just going to be girls, I said, I'm sorry, you won't be able to play.
Okay, just for your daughter's sake, I'd just tell you I played on some co-ed volleyball teams and they went really well. But
Well, I know people that
switching-
actually have had their nose broken.
Switching to this
Yeah.
underlying
Yeah.
question of, we keep hearing it said boys playing on girls' teams. You understand that under the current policies of MISHA and NCAA, there still are two separate leagues, right? There's male and female leagues.
Yes.
And that while you may refer to certain kids as boys playing on girls' teams, those children have gone through fairly complicated processes that include physical changes. Like I think that the NCAA policies generally include hormone treatments, things like that, that actually change the physiology in order to play in the girl, well, not in order to, but in order to qualify. It's only kids that have gone through significant, complicated processes, right?
Yep, but you can't undo being a boy. You can't do that. And so even when we talk about, and you know, that standard, there's also a standard there because you just can't undo being a boy. There's so much you can do in transitioning, but you can't undo
Do you know any
how
kids
you
that
were
have gone through
created.
transitions?
I do not.
Do you know any adults that have gone through transitions?
I do not.
Have you ever sat and talked with anyone that has
But
to
I would
find
be
out what it's
totally
like?
willing. It isn't, you know, look, I'm willing to
Great.
sit
Yeah,
and talk to with anyone.
Exactly.
So
I would just encourage you to do so and hear about it. And
just so you
and
know
maybe
that
explore.
that group, because you need to understand who I am. I'm the person that ministers in East St. Louis, so I'm not scared of sitting down with anyone.
Great.
But they would have to come to me because what I see is such a hesitancy in that community entering in with conservatives.
I
even
apologize.
having
I
a
hear the
discussion.
bell. I
Yeah.
did just want to say that there was another comment you made that I really wanted to address. And I'm already forgetting what it was.
I'm sorry.
In the previous comment, when you were talking about, they should make a separate league for kids that don't fall easily in one box or the other.
Yes.
Did you hear the conversation earlier that right now there are only less than 10 kids in the state that fall in this category?
I did.
And you're suggesting that for them to have a fair opportunity to play, we should be somehow creating a league full of less than 10
This
kids?
is the hard thing. Life isn't fair. Life is not fair. And so what we're trying to create here is a standard where there's going to be a whole group of people punished because life isn't fair. So what you're saying is if they identify this way and there's only a small group of them, that we should go ahead and put the girls at risk. We shouldn't.
I hear you. I guess where we disagree is whether it puts the girls at risk or whether they're punished. And I'll tell you, for myself, I don't see my daughters being punished. I see them playing sports with other kids. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Additional questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Good evening. My name is Rory Picker-Neese, and I'm here today as a rabbi, as the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, which represents 35 member agencies and works on behalf of 60,000 Jews in the St. Louis region, as a very proud feminist, and most importantly, as the mother of this 11-year-old boy, who you'll hear from soon, who knew at the age of 7 that despite what doctors had told us when he was born, that he's a boy. I prepared a lot of remarks for tonight, but I have to say that sitting here for the past 2 hours has been one of the most painful things that I've ever had to do as a mother. And we've been doing this for 4 years. I appreciate what some of you have been saying in terms of trying to make a distinction of whether or not these bills are discriminatory or saying that my child can still play on a sports team. But the reality is that this bill is not about sports. For over 2 hours, this body has been debating whether or not my son counts as a person and whether or not the state of Missouri is looking to protect him. Some of the most powerful people elected in our state are debating our kids' lives in front of them, and they are being tortured by you. I know that you want to debate complex topics. But when you start to legislate this into law, you are giving people an excuse to discriminate against a group that is already one of the most vulnerable groups in our state. And so I beg of you to please listen to their voices. Please understand what is at stake with this bill. And please vote no on House Bill 170, 183, and 337.
My name is Russell Neese. I'm the father of 3 private school kids, including, again, this incredible 11-year-old, an 8-year-old daughter, which I guess makes me as qualified a witness as the Secretary of State, and a 7-year-old, and I'm sorry, he just turned 8, forgive me, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I'm here today to speak specifically against these 3 bills for many of the same reasons that you've heard articulated and will hear articulated. But I have a special contempt for HB170, as it has some provisions, a number of provisions that attempt to regulate the private religious school that my wife and I send our son to, and send all 3 of our kids to. These bills don't just target competitive high school sports. They target my 2nd grader, my 4th grader, my 6th grader. I can't tell you how my son knew that he was a boy when everyone else told us that he was a girl. And as a God-fearing man, I can't tell you why the Lord made him this way. But what I can tell you is he's a wonderful boy who loves to read books in bed long after his bedtime, who loves to go hiking and camping in the woods with me, and who loves playing sports with his friends at school. I've heard many in this body talk at length about the need to stand up for individual liberties and freedoms in the face of an ever-expanding, intrusive big government. But respectfully, regulating private religious schools is a big government overreach. Prohibiting 6th graders from playing sports with their friends is a big government overreach. Legislating based on the genitalia of my 11-year-old, my 9-year-old, or my 8-year-old is a big government overreach. I oppose these bills based on the conservative principles. These bills tie the hands of parents, of educators, and coaches who are closest to the kids, and in the best position to make good decisions that address their specific real needs. And they do so with legislation that's been copied and pasted without any regard for how they'll fit the particularities of the situations in which they may be applied. I urge you to vote no on these bills, and I'm happy to speak with any of you at a future date. All of us, I think, will do that also. We're really happy to talk to you and share more about our experience.
Hi. My name is Dan. I'm 11 years old, and I like doing magic and circus skills, especially unicycling. I'm here today to testify against House Bill 170, 183, and 337. I really like to play sports with my friends, although honestly I'm not very good at it. I really like the chance to play. It makes me feel good when I play with my friends. People keep talking about how it's unfair, but we're talking about kids my age and under. This bill wouldn't help people, it would hurt them. Adults are always telling us that it's not about winning, it's about having fun. And how fun would it be if you couldn't play sports? How fun would it be if your teammates couldn't play with you? How fun would it be if your friends couldn't play sports with you? And how fun would it be if you couldn't play sports with your friends? All because your government thought an 8-year-old was going to take your kid's trophy and therefore should not be allowed to play sports. It just honestly seems like you guys have more important things to worry about than an 11-year-old playing sports with their friends. It shouldn't be the government's job to tell people who can play on sports teams. It should not be the government's job to tell kids they're not allowed to play sports. It should definitely not be the government's job to make laws out of fear. It's the government's job to protect its citizens, it's the government's job to treat everyone fairly, and it's the government's job to make their laws reflect that. Please vote no on House Bill 170, 183, and 337. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a nice evening.
Questions for these witnesses? Representative Weber.
To inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you so much. I believe that you came and testified last session as well. Dan, I believe that you showed us some magic tricks too that were pretty cool. To you parents, yes, we should be having conversations about controversial issues. But at the same time, does this feel like PTSD every time you come back?
It does. My husband can tell you that it was a very painful evening last night getting the notification, having to readjust our whole schedule when this was not what we had planned to do at all today, and preparing ourselves for what we knew was going to be a really hard day, though, like I said, harder than any of the other times that we've come into this building.
Yeah, 100%. And I have to give all of you props because you've had to sit through some horrific testimonies here. And some of the bill sponsors, they're not even here. So you all have sat here and listened to everything, and the bill sponsors who should be in here are not. So thank you for that. Thank you for testifying again.
Representative Quaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to quickly thank you all again for being here and apologize that you weren't notified until about 25 hours before the hearing. I would like to say that's not standard operating procedure in this building, but depending on the topic, I can't say that. And I really just wanted to, again, thank you, Dan, for being here. It has been a pleasure to watch you grow up. I'm sorry that I've had to and that our relationship has been around this. But I just want to say that you are so brave. And every time that you come here, you say the funniest, wittiest things. And it is a breath of fresh air. And I just want to continue to thank you for showing up and being here. You are so brave, and we just are so grateful for you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next in support, please step forward.
Hello, my name is Teresa Collins. I'm coming to talk in support of this bill before my battery dies. Okay, and I completely agree with that family, and it's really government overreach that we're even discussing all these things today. I do support, though, the women's support bill. Science, there is some science to the biological male and female that we just have to agree. I guess we don't have to agree on anything because we're not. But, as far as lung capacity, heart capacity, just bone density, things along this line that I would think would give them that edge, which is where that Title IX thing came in to play, which has worked out to this point. And I don't feel like we're trying to hate on anybody or not give them a place. I really think that they should have a place. Right now, like you said, there's very few kids that are playing sports that this even applies to in Misha. So, there are still intramural sports, I think, that everybody can still participate in, as far as I remember. So I'm feeling like, so we're not trying to take anybody from playing with their kids, their friends. I think that's a wonderful thing. Sports are great and good for development and socialization. So, that's an option. And now we have coaches. Maybe I don't even need to go there, but you've got college coaches that really need to start to recruit people that fall into that not so neat box, so that they can have athletes on their teams that can compete at that level. And I just feel that's even makes it harder when you get to places like college or Olympics, which we were talking about. But this has nothing to do with that. We're just talking about kids, under 18. So, okay. Any questions? I guess I could go on, but I don't want to take anybody's time.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Ani.
Just briefly, so you said that you agree that this is government overreach, that we're even having this conversation, but then in the same breath, you said you support this legislation, correct?
Yeah, it's
okay,
crazy because
thank
I
you.
was thinking the same thing, like with parent rights. Like, who took my rights away? It's like, why am I here for this? But yeah, it's very sad. Yeah. Is that it? Okay, thanks.
Additional questions? Seeing none. Next in opposition, please step forward.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you for hearing my comments today. My name is Dakota Allen. I reside in House District 23, and I'm here in stout opposition to House Bills 170, 183, and 337. I want to start by reminding the sponsor, who is unfortunately not here, that it is absolutely unacceptable and harmful to misgender individuals, and that, I'm sorry if you like it or not, but trans men are men, trans girls are girls. I understand that we're having a difficult conversation and not all of you work every day with trans individuals, but that, Representative Lovasco, is why this conversation harms people. When we're doing this type of a dialogue, when we fail to honor people's identities, it is genuinely harmful to individuals. So we need to be really careful when we're having this dialogue. I'm not here to dispute everything that you guys have said, but I am here to have a conversation about how this harms your constituents. So I do want to speak plainly about what your guys' intentions are. We have over a dozen anti-LGBT bills that have been filed this year. So to me, your priorities have become abundantly clear. But, excuse me, these bills are the definition of cultural warfare. This session is marked with over a dozen bills attacking this community, and today we're addressing 8 of them. I'm having myself really baffled with what you guys would gain by passing legislation that, in my opinion, is inherently evil. I understand that we've not necessarily seen eye to eye on everything, but this is problematic. Trans youth are not something to fear. Our schools rank among the lowest in our nation on a number of fronts, yet the legislative focus this year in the educational realm is centered on responding to a handful of instances trans youth have participated in a sport of their choice. That includes both trans males and females, but we're only worried about the females. What's more, we have no indications that any of these athletes outperformed their counterparts on the state level that harmed opportunities for anyone involved. Even so, to be blunt, I bet every single woman on this committee could kick my butt in sports. Many of you may not know them yet, but you're going to start learning the names of these trans children in the worst possible ways if you continue down this path. Passing this legislation sends a message to our youth, one you can't take back. You might succeed in protecting your image of what women's sports are supposed to look like, but you do so by sacrificing the well-being, freedoms, and even the lives of an entire group of children. We know that trans youth are significantly more likely to attempt suicide than their cisgendered peers, with 82% having considered the act. This type of dialogue, the dialogue that you control, has a very real-world impact. Whether you know them or not, I implore you, seek deep within yourselves and reflect on your intentions and goals when you originally entered office. I don't believe you to be inherently evil. I believe you do have intentions to do good, but I'm here to tell you that this is not your best. I'll take any questions.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in support of these bills, please step forward.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Aguirre. I'm a mother, a grandmother, and an educator. And I have worked with the students in many facets. I've worked with students who are gay. I have worked with students who prefer to be called by a different name. And I have worked with students who are very bothered that their gay counterparts are being accepted to the point that they are being excluded. And as a mother of a son who wants to protect women, I know many young men who want to be the men, where they want to protect, they want to be that protector for these women, because anyone who has a little sister or any sister knows that as a man, they want to make sure that no one hurts their little sisters or their big sisters in our case. But I think, again, we're kind of jumping all over the place in regards to what we're talking about. We're simply talking about if a student or a child is being introduced or is being asked if they want to participate in a co-ed sport, that's different. They already know what the expectation is. But when a young woman or girl goes to play a sport on a girl's team, and then you bring boys onto the team, that is modification of what the rules are supposed to be. Okay? And this is not about hating. My children and I know trans kids. I know people who have been affected by sex trafficking, and I know sex trafficking does not discriminate against any person. So I think we need, when we talk about people, there's a difference between respecting a person because they are a person and what we believe, and as a Christian, I'm just going to say it is against the Word of God. And whether you agree with it or not, as a Christian, That is what I believe. And if you have a problem with it, you can have that debate with the Lord. But you're not going to have, I believe what God says. He's the creator of the universe. And though we are at this place and we are discussing this, the reality is people are debating really what does the word of God say and what does the world say. And we can sit here and can have this debate. But the key thing I think all of us need to know is that it is so important. When we see someone's car, if they're flipped on the side of the road, we don't ask if they're black or white. We don't ask if they're gay or straight. We see a person, and we need to do that when we see people. But again, I have students, male students, asking me, why does this other student who's gay get all the privileges, gets to do all these things while we are being told we can't do this? And, again, we need to get back to what the reality is, and that is we're talking about sports.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions for this witness? Representative Quaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really quick, I appreciate you being here. I know we obviously disagree on this topic. Do you believe that it is my job, our job here, to be legislating the Word of God as you interpret it?
You are to be legislatures, but our government is founded upon the Word of God.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would ask the audience to, again, refrain from outbursts. Everyone will have an opportunity that wants to come forward and testify, and you can include whatever you would like in your testimony, but please respect the proceedings. Representative Reuter, did you want to inquire?
Yes, thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you for all your service with the youth of our country and especially our state. So you mentioned in your testimony that in your experience you've heard students complain because they said that gay students get more rights. So can you just give me some examples of that? Because I had a student. I had 5 male students today and yesterday go, why does this particular student get to do all these things? And I'm not going to just talk about where I teach. Why do they get all these privileges? This is a public school system, and yet we're not allowed to do it. This is not, when you walk into, I will tell you this, when any student walks into my classroom, gay, straight, or if they want to be called by another name, I do my job, and my job is to teach them. I don't show favoritism. What I do not allow, whether you are on the right or on the left, is distract from the education of all other students. So just for example, can you name one of the privileges that they thought that was?
He gets to hug the girls. He gets to be around the girls. There's a separate, and it's not a private school, it's a public school. I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to get into details of the school, but this is something that kids feel uncomfortable. I've had boys constantly say, I don't feel comfortable, but they have to accept it as though it's too bad. And again, I teach as a person, as a Christian, we respect people because they are people. We treat people kindly because they are people, whether we agree with them or not. But the reality is there are differences. If we go to the cemetery and dig up people's bones, they don't say, oh, this was a trans. They're going to say it's a male or female. So we can sit here and we can do what we want, and the suicides, you want to talk about suicides, look at the people who have transitioned and they can't detransition. There are so many kids coming out and people coming out that are literally talking about how they are at the point of suicide because they were led by adults in our school system, in our workplaces, in our families to say, oh, you must be this. Just because a girl is a tomboy doesn't make her a boy. It doesn't mean she wants to be a boy. We all go through phases. Anyone who's competitive, we all have gone through our tomboy stages. But the reality is that we are dealing with young kids. If they want to make that decision at 18, that's their prerogative. And as much as I disagree with it, they're adults. But when we are pushing children to do these things, and I'm telling you, the schools are pushing it, and they are pushing it hard. And they're telling everyone else to shut up. If you disagree, that's too bad for you.
Additional inquiries, Representative Engel.
Good evening.
Good morning. Evening.
Yeah.
Which is morning.
It is evening, yeah. So where in the Lee Summit School District do you think that people are receiving more gay rights than others?
Several places, but I will not say where, but it's any school.
But specifically in the Lee Summit School District, which I represent.
Okay, well, Kansas City area, just overall, it's just, we're finding it everywhere.
Who is we?
Teachers are coming out saying they can't even speak out or have a
Because
different...
children are too gay?
Yes, that's exactly, and your sarcasm's not appreciated.
Okay.
Okay, now if you want to have a
lot of your
conversation
statements
about
are-
our children, that's about children,
I'm happy
that's
to.
fine.
My children attend Lee Summit Public Schools, so I'm
Okay.
happy to talk to you about
But
it.
I'm just saying that in our school system,
Mm-hmm.
in general, we talk about character, about being kind, but yet
Right.
if you disagree with the LGBTQ group,
Right.
you are a bigot, you're a homophobe.
So one second, because I do want to get to the crux of that. Because I do think that there is a difference between being kind and being accepting. And from the time that I was in middle school, or elementary school, middle school, high school, I'm not going to age myself here, but it was a while ago, we were not really taught not to bully in the way that they are now. And so a lot of what my children come home saying from the Lee Summit School District is about being kind to others regardless of how they present themselves, with how they identify. And if they hear something, whether it be in the news, whether it be politicians, whether it be crazy mailers that come to my house, they call it out. They
And I
call it
can
out for
tell
what it
you,
is.
my kids
It's
have
bullying.
experienced that teachers have pushed it so much that my kids have been bullied when they were in high school.
Your kids were bullied in what way?
Well, the whole thing
By the
is
teachers.
no, not by the teachers, but
Oh.
they push the agenda of the LGBTQ, which we shouldn't be pushing any agenda. Because you know what? As educators, we're here to teach all children.
Right. So, I mean,
my
possibly,
kids, but when
hold on,
someone
hold on,
comes
hold on,
into
hold
a
on one second.
classroom...
I'm sorry, this is still my inquiry. Is it part of our culture that we're trying to push to be accepting of all Americans regardless of race, creed, identity? Because every day when we do our morning prayer in the chamber, we pledge allegiance to the flag. And I was thinking a lot about that this morning because it says liberty and justice for all. Not for just people that look like you and I, for all.
I agree.
And so what I see with bills like this is we're trying to divide people. We're not just trying to divide trans kids from playing the gender sport that they choose. We are trying to divide the people in this room, the people in this building, the people in the state of Missouri, the people of the United States of America. Because guess what? We're letting gays use bathrooms. We're letting gays get married. And so we have to find something else to divide Americans. And that's a huge problem. And I just...
That has nothing to do with boys and girls sports, what you're talking...
It has everything to do with boys and girls sports.
But that's not pertaining to these laws.
It absolutely is.
These laws that are being...
It absolutely is, actually, because it's... We can talk more about the Bostic decision later.
We can have a conversation about everything that's going on in our society at different levels and things that are going on. I mean, but we're here for three laws that are being introduced.
And you were saying that kids in the Lee Summit School District were being bullied with
I said
LGBT
kids
agenda.
in the school system. I never said anything about any specific school district.
Well, when you run for office and you tell people where you work, it comes out later.
Okay. At least I'm a school district then.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's what you want to tell everybody.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next witness. Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony.
Appreciate your
Next witness in opposition, please step forward. And proceed whenever you're ready.
Hi, I just want to start off that I am a transgender Jewish youth who lives in Missouri in St. Louis. And so I want to propose to all of you to actively listen to my voice, and even if you're uncomfortable, to ask the questions.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt, but would you mind sharing your name for the record, please?
My name is Neon, and my pronouns are he/they.
And your last name also, please.
Liebson, Liebson.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Neon. I am a transgender Jewish person. I oppose bills 183, 170, and 337 due to the harm it inflicts upon my community. As a transgender student, sports have been very difficult. I don't fit into the gender binary and have been unable to play sports including basketball, soccer, volleyball, and baseball as my truest self. Luckily, I've been able to find my community in Taekwondo and fencing, but I'm lucky. As trans youth, we are often discouraged or banned from playing sports with our cisgender peers. Trans kids are kids, and we should be allowed to participate in activities and given equal opportunities as our authentic selves. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Representative Quaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, again, want to take a second and thank you for being here and thank you for your bravery, for sharing your story. I'm sorry that you had to come here on a school night of all things. I hope that you make it back in time, but I just wanted to say thank you, and your story means so much to us. And I can speak for myself, continues to give me the energy to have these discussions year after year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in support of these bills, please step forward.
Wow. My name is Nancy Dilcor, and I'm here in support of bills HB170, 183, and 337. I agree with pretty much everything that's already been said in support of, so I will try to, off the cuff, add some other things to it. I want to say that I acknowledge how difficult that it is for the trans community. I have a niece that is 30 plus years old, and she transitioned she identifies as a man, and she transitioned with cross-sex hormones and with transition surgery. I know she has had a very difficult life, and now that she's transitioned, she just lives alone, or not alone, but with her wife, and she's just doesn't really interact with society. But anyway, there's this huge push in our society to normalize something that is not normal, and it is pushed in the schools. It's pushed in every area of our society. It's infiltrated everything, and that is why we have the situation that we have. We have a God, and He loves all of us, and I would care to say that this is not about whether someone counts as a person. All of these people in this room, all of us are people, and we are all loved by God. We're all created in God's image. And it's not about validating them as a person. Every person should be validated for who they are. The problem is when we try to normalize something, it's a condition where what they think in their mind is not, they don't identify with their biological sex. And that is not normal. And it's a very difficult thing to have to live your life like that. And I empathize with every single one of those people. But I will say that we have a God, and He makes the rules. And I'm sorry if, one day we're all going to be held account to how we live our lives and how we respond to God Almighty. And we have an adversary. His name is Satan, and he's a liar. And you guys can laugh, and that's fine. I know you guys are going to give me all these wonderful questions, and that is fine. But I feel sorry for everybody that's laughing at the things I have to say, because what I'm saying is true. And one day you will be held to account. And I'm just saying that God loves every single one of you. Every single one of you, He loves as we are. And that's all I have to say, I think. So my time's up.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions of this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Good evening. My name is the Reverend Mike Angel. I am a husband, a father, a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and the priest and pastor at the Episcopal Church of the Holy Communion in University City, Missouri. And I am here tonight in opposition to all of these bills except the bi-monthly pay. That sounds like a good idea. But especially against the sports bills tonight. I want to say I actually really liked that language that one of the bill sponsors used about the altar of inclusivity. I might borrow that at my church. Doubtless today, and we've already heard quite a bit about God, but in the background is this reading of Genesis about God creating people male and female from chapter 1, verse 27. What's interesting about that is if you look into the text, you really have to pay attention to repetition in the Bible. That verse twice, for the sake of emphasis, says that people are made in God's image. The Bible also says that the Word of God is living and active. Part of what I've seen in my community of faith are parents of trans kids looking for a faith community where they can be loved and supported and find other people on a similar journey. I don't know of any parents of trans kids that chose to end up in that place. I know a lot of parents of trans kids who have struggled to reconcile their own faith tradition, their own background, with their sense that God loved and created their child. My husband and I are raising a kid that we adopted from the foster system in Missouri, and he's 4, and I had to explain to him why I wasn't going to be there when he woke up or when he went to bed tonight. And the only thing I could come up with is to explain to him, because all the rest of the bills were really complicated, that there were some people that were trying to keep some of his friends from playing sports. And he said, Dada, tell them that not to be mean. I think I do, as a Christian, and I appreciate the committee chair's words at the beginning about civility, I do think we have a lot of people with good intentions in this room. And I think we have a situation where intention and impact are not lining up on these bills, where the impact that you are hearing from these kids and these parents needs to be held in account more than the politics around them. Please listen. And the last thing I want to say is I am deeply inspired by the courage of the young people, the trans people that have showed up and listened today as their humanity has been questioned and attacked. And as a pastor, I need to say, God loves you exactly for who you are. God calls you to be exactly who you are. And we will win this in the long run. I'd take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness in support of these bills, please step forward. Any other witnesses in support? Okay, seeing none. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
I know. It's going to be fun now. You start taking bids to get us up here, bring in some more revenue. Good evening. I think it's well into the evening now. My name is Debbie Jackson. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm here in opposition to all 3 of these bills. I have some really brilliant things written down here that I hope you will read because I'm now going to go off the cuff. This is the 8th year that I have been coming to this building to speak about bills attacking our LGBTQ community. It started with religious refusals, and then it moved to bathrooms, and then for 4 years we've been coming and we've been talking about sports, and we've been talking about healthcare, which I know we'll hopefully get to before tomorrow, and many other things. My child is not here with me today. My child socially transitioned at the age of 4. My child is no stranger to being in the public. My child was on the cover of National Geographic magazine as the first out trans person on the cover. It was called A Gender Revolution. And we've gone through some pretty horrific things In the time since that magazine came out, we've had so much hate and threats directed at us. But I will tell you that the trauma my child has experienced coming to this building is hands down the worst trauma that they have ever experienced. 1 year ago, we were here in a Senate committee hearing about sports, and my child, who was 14 years old, was asked on the record by a sitting senator about their genitals. I would like you to think about that for a moment. In a room full of strangers, with a person in power sitting in front of them, my child was asked about their genitals when they just came to say, "I'd really like to play volleyball." When you ask about the number of kids that this impacts, there are 3.5 million cisgender female athletes competing in the United States, and we've heard that Misha says that there are 5 trans kids. We don't even know if those are 5 trans boys, and yes, let's say trans boys, please, here, and trans girls, instead of pretending our kids aren't real and valid. We don't even know if these are trans boys or trans girls who would be impacted by this. We don't know. And why don't we know? Because they're not taking over girls' sports here. They're not winning everything. We don't know if they are coming in like the mayor last when they compete. What we do know is that 18 states have passed these bigoted bills, thank you for calling them out as bigoted, in the last 2 to 3 years only. But we have 20 states who have trans-affirming sports policies that have been in effect, some of them for well more than a decade. So why aren't we learning from those states about how to incorporate trans kids just the way Missouri already has, in a way that's fair and equitable to all? Y'all are asking the wrong questions. If you ask how many kids are traumatized, my kid's not playing sports. My kid is traumatized. If you ask how many kids this impacts, it impacts every single trans kid in this state, whether they come to testify and bravely sit in front of you or not. They get the message that you are sending, and that is shameful.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Okay, seeing none, next witness in opposition.
Yes, my name is Dr. Tom Jackson. I'm a resident of Kansas City, Missouri, and I probably can't say anything better than what my spouse just said. But I'd like to do 2 things that has not been done this evening. Talk about science and talk to someone who's actually worked with trans athletes, because none of you or none of the current witnesses has said either of those things. As my wife stated, there's roughly, 5 kids in the state of Missouri that are competing, and not one has won a competition. So I really think that this is creating a bill for a problem that doesn't exist. But beyond that, one of the current sponsors earlier talked about the trans woman who won the track race in Connecticut in the 100-meter dash. What they didn't go on to tell you was that 2 weeks after that event, the cis girl who filed the lawsuit beat them in competition, and their lawsuit was thrown out of court because they were found to have no standing because there was no harm committed. So that case is now on appeal, as was mentioned, but it was thrown out because the cisgender girl beat the trans competitor. The other thing I would like to talk about is no one's really talking about kids who transition early in life. My child socially transitioned at 4, began getting therapy in her young teens, and then was put on hormone therapy. For kids who transition young or who are undergoing hormone blockers, they do not go through the concordant puberty as their peers, so then they have no statistical advantage whatsoever to the people they're competing against. Why are we not talking about those children? Because I can tell you, as a parent of a transgender child who's had those therapies, they are the most unathletic person on the planet, and I can promise you that. Another thing I'd like to tell you is that we typically no one's really talking about working with trans athletes. I have had the pleasure in my career in sports medicine to work with quite a few trans athletes, and I can think of one in particular. It was a female in her late 30s who was about 6'2" and about 200 pounds, who competed in a World Long Drive Championship. Now, the World Long Drive followed the rules of the Olympic Committee and allowed this person to compete based on their personal therapies and medical history. And because of that, they competed for over 2 years and are still competing in that sport. And I can tell you that my particular athlete has yet to win a competition, and the best they've ever placed is 6th. So a person who went through puberty as a male, transitioned later in life, now because of them being on hormones for a duration of time, has no competitive advantages against cisgender women. The other thing I'd like to point out is there was a lot of discussion, I think, about what there may or may not be a competitive advantage. When you start estrogen, within little as 5 months, you can start to see changes in bone density, muscular strength, and or muscular endurance. What estrogen does is it causes apoptosis of skeletal muscle, which means that the muscular cells themselves start to wither away and die. And because of that, transgender women have less of a competitive advantage if they've been on hormone than their peers. So I think these are things you all need to consider when we're talking about trans athletes competing in sports. So,
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Cassie Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Social Workers, Missouri Chapter. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Missouri, also a former teacher, retired, and a god-awful athlete. I'm lucky I made it down the stairs in one piece. So I would like to speak as a mental health professional, as someone who represents the largest mental health workforce in the state of Missouri. And I would also like to speak as someone who worked with two little girls, who got the joy of babysitting two little girls, 8 and 9 years old, on one day for one conference. Now, these two little girls, it was the first time they were ever able to swim with another little girl competitively. They got to race against each other. They'd never gotten to do that. It's the first time they ever got to do it. They were 8 and 9 years old, and the reason they'd never gotten to swim against another little girl was because they were transgender girls. And their parent never let them swim with other little girls because the other little girls' parents were afraid for them. They were afraid that the other girls' parents would think something would happen, that they would have to protect their little girls from another little 8-year-old girl or a little 9-year-old girl, that something bad would happen because their little girl wanted to go swimming with them. So there they were, 8 and 9 years old, out in the pool, splashing around at this conference, having a great time. And I saw smiles, and their parents, whenever I brought them back out of the pool, a little flip, 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 they said they'd never seen them so happy in their whole lives because they'd never actually gotten to do something like that. Be with peers, be able to play. That is what this is about. Whenever we're talking about protecting girls, when we're talking about the hopes and dreams of our daughters and granddaughters, we need to include our transgender daughters and granddaughters because they are girls as well. And when we exclude the hopes and dreams, the sport opportunities of our daughters and granddaughters who are trans, we are not including all of our daughters and granddaughters. We are excluding those little girls from those opportunities. Now, I recognize that there were 3 men up here in these chairs tonight who are very concerned about protecting women's sports and women's opportunities. And I appreciate that. And a lot of people have thrown around a lot of numbers about how many people does this impact. Someone brought up the rate that there is 1.7% of the American population, the world population, is intersex in some form or fashion, and that is accurate. And about 1.8%, the most recent numbers from the CDC Health Disparities Research indicate people are transgender. About 1.8% of Americans are transgender. Now, if you put those two numbers together, you get about 3.5%. Now, that is the number of people who are impacted by discussions like this, of being told you don't exist, you aren't valuable, you don't need to be included, you're irrelevant, and you have another place, or not this place, or not that place. That's more than there are blue-eyed people in the world. I'm blue-eyed. I don't want to be told that I don't exist. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm open to any questions as a mental health professional.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Representative Meredith.
Briefly to inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you. So hearing you talk about the medical realities of this, and I will say I'm also piggybacking on the previous witness, I think, on this a little bit, but it strikes me that 50 or 60 years ago, this legislature was likely sitting here debating whether a different marginalized group should be allowed to play sports and integrate into sports. And there were folks that said, well, but those kids will have a competitive advantage against my kids because biology. Mm-hmm. And medical professionals and science said otherwise. That's not how it works. And here, it sounds like we're hearing the same claim, but then the professionals, mental health professionals, people that understand biology and the various treatments involved, are sitting up here saying, that's not how it works. First of all, am I hearing that right? But second of all, do you think that in 50 or 60 years, folks are going to look back on this conversation with a similar, why weren't people listening, and why were they being so hateful?
I think that's extremely well observed, and I would completely agree with you. The science continues to evolve. We continue to recognize as the science evolves, and we continue to recognize that transgender folks need full inclusion, and we recognize that they don't deserve this hateful rhetoric. We will become ashamed of the things we've heard tonight.
And ultimately, instead of being driven by fear, we should be listening to the people that study these things and who are trying to do what's best for all our kids.
And the kids who are in this room and made me cry tonight, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time. My name is Nate Orr. I'm a corporate attorney from Kansas City, and I came here really in two capacities. My wife and I are blessed to have 4 kids, one of whom is a transgender daughter who's 11, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I had the intention of trying to take that out of the abstract and make it human, but I feel like I don't need to speak to that much after hearing from some of the kids that have come up, especially Dan. But I also did want to talk a little bit to the business community aspect, because I think these things go hand in hand. And I want to say this to humanize it in some way. You know, I'm a 6th generation Missourian. My dad grew up on a farm in northwest Missouri, and when our little girl came and said to her mother and I that she was a girl, I'm not going to tell you that it was an easy or a fast way to process that. I think that the priest mentioned that he counsels parents that go through this. I can assure you that our own experience is not one of pushing anything on this little girl. To the contrary, it was and is a long process. It was a long process of dealing with my own dad, you know, this wonderful grandfather who has fully embraced our little girl more than you could imagine, partly because, you know, he knows her, and there's a human element to that. I disagree a little bit respectfully, and I wanted to say to the whole body here, you know, I'm a businessman. I vote Republican and Democrat. I'm probably your traditional swing voter. And I do want this state to be open for business, which I'll address in just a couple seconds, and I promise I'll shut up. And I'm not going to come back for the health portion because all of my comments are applicable to all of this, and you don't want to hear from me anymore anyway. I will tell you that my little girl, when I left the house this morning on short notice, just said before I left, do the best you can, you know. These discussions do hit the headlines, and it impacts them. They see it. They're not dumb. And, you know, Dan came in the restroom when I was in there earlier and looked mortified that I locked eyes with him. And that's not good. I'll close by saying the headlines also, they do hit corporations. Nashville is thriving. It's an awesome town. I was on the FIFA committee for Kansas City. Nashville didn't get those games because of this. We were told that, and we were told we almost didn't get them. And that's the beginning. And I think this representative is wrong about 50 years from now. I think it's going to be 5 years from now. And I implore you, I beg you, please have us and this state be on the right side of history.
Questions for this witness, Representative Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you and all the parents who are coming out here tonight to fight on behalf of your children. I can't imagine how that feels. I'm so sorry that you have to do it, but thank you for your bravery. Truly, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Further questions, Representative Meredith.
Thank you. First of all, I agree. 5 years is actually probably more realistic on this.
I didn't mean to pick a fight with you.
Fact is, I think a lot of the country will look at us already with that attitude. But I wanted to express thanks also for you being here and talking about what it's like to be a parent experiencing these questions firsthand. We have asked a lot of the people involved in pushing this legislation about their experiences with trans kids, their experiences with trans adults. And the answer has been overwhelmingly limited, if any, experience. So I just hope you know how important it is to hear from you. And despite the fact that you shouldn't have to be here to talk about personal experience, people in here need to hear it because it's hard for folks to understand that haven't experienced people that sound different to them and don't fit the mold that they're used to. And hearing from you helps open people's eyes a lot, and you and other parents and kids. And we talk a lot in this place about parents' rights to do what's best for their kids. And parents know best for their kids. I hear that all the time in here. And I trust that you know your kid a lot better than any of us do. And you know your kid's health team better than any of us do. So thank you for sharing what you know.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And I mentioned this to the chairman earlier. I and a lot of people in here want to work with everybody in the room. I mean, we want to have a dialogue, and we're not hearing the concerns that are raised on that end either. I mean, I'm a person whose profession provides constantly for dialogue and finding solutions, and I'm not an activist in here. I'm just looking out for my kid, and I'd like to keep a dialogue going.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that your kid or you would consider leaving this state if bills like these today are passed?
Unfortunately, yes. Particularly the health bills.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any additional questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Woo, y'all, hello. My name is Struby Struble. Thank you for having me and the opportunity to discuss. I'm here as both a woman athlete and a trans athlete. Spoiler, gender is complicated. I would be allowed to play. I wouldn't feel comfortable probably with things like this. Okay, so I want to speak to a couple different things. I hope y'all can hear me. Just real quickly, since we were talking about the parents in the room, I did not have supportive parents. They lost me. I had an aunt who wouldn't recognize who I was. She lost me. They don't have me anymore. And I have an amazing family. And I went to a drag show where there was a number about PFLAG, and it blew my mind that parents could support their kids no matter who they were. Like, it's just, so I had a rougher go as a younger one. I'm about to talk about that. I just also want to talk about, quickly, Title IX was mentioned a lot, and like, I'm all for Title IX. Thank you so much, Title IX. Also, it was 50 years ago. Like, computer laws are different, airplane laws are different. I think we can recognize that we've made, like, Billie Jean King, Title IX, let's go, she's on our side. Like, where's the feminists? Estoy aquí, let's go. Like, I am a feminist, I will fight with you. The things that have made me equally angry tonight is that you think I can't beat boys? You think I can't beat boys? You think I can't beat men? Like, we need to not put women in such tiny little boxes as less than. We need to stop putting value on genders in the ways we put value on them and recognize the complexity and difference of all of us, and then let us be ourselves and see how that goes. I'll beat all the boys. Let's do a push-up competition. Can't run because I'm in a knee brace because I still play because I'm injured. All right. Surgery, I'll heal. I'll be back out there. Watch out. And like, it happens. I play at the Macon Forum here in town. I'm a Colombian. I have to fight to defend my gender to be allowed on the co-ed field. If you think it doesn't trickle up, it trickles up too. And I do fight, and we do win. Sometimes they count me as a boy. All right. The question of why we play sports was really fascinating to me because that's so much of why I get so passionate here. Soccer, not hyperbole, kept me alive. Soccer, when I crossed that white line onto the soccer field, it literally became an equal playing field. It didn't matter that I was bullied. It didn't matter that I didn't have clothes or money. It didn't matter that my family didn't like me. It didn't matter what my grades were. It didn't matter that I didn't have money or food or a car in the parking lot. It mattered how hard I worked and how much I put in. All right, I have notes. Soccer taught me discipline, that you can win it back when you lose it. I would also argue that soccer is the best sport. That's not exactly what we're getting into, but in soccer, if you lose it, you don't get subbed out. Win it back. It taught me that hard work that pays off. All this talk about winning, soccer taught me that losing is a part of it, and you go and you play the next day. I would not be here without the lesson of losing. Oh no! Athletics taught me how to use my body to keep me safe. We talk about safety. Like, athletics is what taught me how to keep myself safe as a woman. We're talking about protecting women. Let me do some push-ups. That's helpful. Let me gain some confidence on a field. That's helpful. I think the cue means I have to stop.
It does, but I'm going to call on somebody that may give you a little extra time. Okay. Representative Meredith, please proceed.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. You read my mind. My question is, what else did you have to say? Because I think this is a helpful perspective.
So I had two sections. I gave you most of taught me from soccer specifically, and then I have some athletics. So the one I missed was I have power over the outcome of how hard I work, and I have power over my life and my impact of those around me. So like, I just learned that I could work hard and that would mean something. And that does not feel true in so many other ways. I mean, school, I was also a nerd. So like, if I studied hard, I could get a good grade. Like, but really the sports was what did that. And then athletics taught me how to use my body to keep me safe, my own strength, not to give up no matter how hard it gets. When I didn't have any friends, I had teammates, and being a part of something matters. When I didn't believe that I had worth, I knew that at the very least I had value to my team and on my field, and I should have had more than that, but it was enough to keep me here. And now I am able to spread that back, and I just want all of us to allow for the complexity of experience that is also included in gender, and to let us play sports, please. Let the kids play sports. Let us learn those lessons. And yes, my notes said, well, I want to have the complex conversation, but with people who are also researching and reading the other things. And that was really challenging tonight, that there wasn't anyone who seemed to, like, we could talk about gender for hours. Let's go. Let's talk about it. Intersex and trans and all of the everythings. But I can't have that conversation if you're not meeting me at the table.
So, thank you. And would you say that all those things you learned from soccer, those are things that kids who are in especially vulnerable places facing bullying and lack of support, that we have statistics that show are really some of our most vulnerable kids in the state?
Yes.
Really are especially in need of that opportunity?
Because also, like, I can't go to church where other people can get support because they say I'm bad at church. And I can't go to the choir because do I stand on the suit side or the dress side, and everyone's mad at me for where I go. Like, where do I get to go? I can go on a soccer field, and that matters how hard I work and how much work I put in, and my teammates are there to like pass it with me and hug me when we lose and high five me when we win. Like, we have to have somewhere, and sports is such a magical, beautiful space to learn lessons like teamwork and working hard and losing. Ooh, I've won. I've played pro, I've played semi-pro, but losing is what taught me things.
Thank you. Sounds like if we want to protect kids, it should be by supporting them.
I agree.
Thank you.
I'm with you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Good evening. I am Jennifer Harris Dalt. I'm a pastor in the city of St. Louis and a resident of Maryland Heights, Missouri. I mentioned that I am a pastor, which would be enough of a reason for me to be here tonight. But more importantly, I am the mother of a 7-year-old girl who happens to be transgender. I was supposed to be at home with her this evening, meeting her and her sister at the bus, being excited about the snow day that they have from school tomorrow. And instead, I'm here, trying to figure out the best words to communicate the pain that my family feels over these bills, in hopes that when you study these bills, you see me, that you see the kids and the parents and the people in this room behind me who are begging you to see us. My daughter is a second grader who adores school. She loves reading, and she unfortunately loves Pokemon cards. Her teacher tells me that she is the kid who makes sure that everyone has a friend, and she loves playing with her friends. Now, I keep hearing over and over again this idea that every trans girl is somehow an Olympic athlete. And while my daughter is 7 and therefore thinks that she can be all things, she inherited her athletic ability from her mother, which is to say she has no talent. But she loves playing. She plays every opportunity she can get with her friends. And I know that as soon as she is old enough to be on a school sports team, she will want to be on it. My daughter deserves to get to continue playing, or at least to be cut from her team because of her lack of skill. She deserves to make her healthcare decisions with her doctor based on best care practices. She deserves to be herself, her full, compassionate, generous, beautiful self, without fearing attacks from the government who is charged with protecting her. These bills scare her, and they scare me. And that's not just a fear of them passing, but a fear that just being talked about, the messages that she internalizes. My daughter is beloved by her community, by her family, by her church, by her school, by her friends, but she keeps hearing from her government that she is something to be feared, something not worthy of consideration or protection. And I use something intentionally because she's not seen as a person in these bodies. She hears that she needs to be kind to others, but that it is okay for others to exclude her, to misgender her, to treat her as less than human. Please vote against these bills.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Hello, I am Simon with We Are the People, STL. I'll keep this very short and sweet for you. I keep hearing people say they want this bill to protect women. But where was this energy when reproductive rights were on the topic, like earlier this year or last year? This bill isn't about protecting women. It's to target trans kids. With your bigoted agenda, you don't care about people, you just want control. I taught preschool for 5 years, and I'm now a nanny and someone who works with children on a daily basis. I can speak on the importance of letting children express themselves and to have access to the community that is provided by the team sports. Children just want to live their lives. They want to have fun. They want to play with their friends. And by introducing bills like this, it takes away from children being children. Most of those in support of this bill are pro-life. If you are truly pro-life, you would not support a bill like this because 41% of trans kids take their lives because of these bigoted agendas and the oppressions that they face. Bringing bills up like this brings blood to your hands. Are you okay with having blood on your hands? That's all I have.
Thanks for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Hi, my name is Jay Nam. I am an undergraduate wildlife biology student at the University of Missouri. And despite the fact that I look like a long-haul trucker, I have competed in non-scholastic athletics since elementary school. I've competed in a variety of athletics, including long-distance running, and my favorite, which was mixed martial arts. I have a single question that I would like to pose to you, and that question is, would you be comfortable with me competing against your daughter? Me, personally. Because according to the bill that is being proposed, all three bills that are being proposed, I would be allowed and encouraged to compete against your daughters. I am a biological female. I was born female. I started transitioning when I was a young teenager. You will get the sob story during the medical bills, but for now, I would like to leave you with that singular question. Are you comfortable with my long-haul trucker body competing in mixed martial arts against your daughter? Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, next witness in opposition, please step forward.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jackie Barget. I'm a registered lobbyist here on behalf of Mayor Jones in the city of St. Louis. I will submit a letter for you from Mayor Jones that outlines her opposition. And I won't repeat a lot of what you guys have already heard tonight or what Mayor Lucas and Mr. Cooper said pertaining to the business community and the economic impact. But I do want to say, and for the folks that came before me, they took a lot of what I was going to say, but I wanted to make sure you guys had the opportunity to hear from them as you see me every day in the halls. I do want to point out one thing. Mayor Jones says in her letter that you all will read, and she said, "I do not care about the gender identity of my son's teammates or competitors. What parents like me care about is ensuring our children are supported, cared for, respected, and loved." I will say as someone that was fairly successful in female competitions in my life, the meaning of sports and who you're competing with, who you're competing against, whether you're very good or you're very bad on a team, that family and the support that you get from that is something that we should not be excluding anyone from. The amount of self-confidence and self-esteem that you can build from any participation in a sport is something that everyone should have the ability to experience. With that, I will keep it short if you all have any questions for me.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Are there any other witnesses to testify in opposition to this bill? Please step forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Otto Fajan on behalf of Missouri NEA. We're speaking specifically in opposition to the three bills relating to sports participation as they're drafted. I spoke on behalf of the association on similar bills last session, and I just wanted to point out, from the educator's point of view, athletics and other activities are sometimes that one thing that a kid, that's the thing that lights them up. That's the thing that keeps them progressing and succeeding in school and in life. And for particularly vulnerable populations, we want to make sure that we don't have a narrowed curriculum. We don't take away from them whatever that one thing is. We want to make sure we keep that one thing that keeps them moving forward. I will also say, if you all want to get into the weeds at some point offline, this is not the time for that. This issue has grown a lot of weeds in the last 12 months. I apologize to the House sponsors, but I was given the chance to brief Senate sponsors on all of the changes in policy across the planet that make this bill kind of out of sync with NCAA. It's completely out of sync with where NCAA is. It's completely out of sync with where the IOC is. The planet has moved on, swimming, rugby, world athletics. They're all moving in different directions in sport-specific ways. I'm happy to get into those weeds with you all, but that's probably something that needs to inform your decision as you talk about this issue. Happy to answer questions at this time or
Any questions from the committee? Representative Meredith.
Thank you. I would like to get into those weeds at some point. Obviously, we don't probably have time right now. But I did want to ask, with respect to the policies of NCAA changing groups like that, a couple of these bills, or at least one of them, seeks to essentially regulate the NCAA and prevent their rules from applying here. So I am curious, first of all, do we have the authority to do that? And second of all, if we try and do it, and it is constitutional for us to do, would it just prevent us from being able to participate in NCAA sports?
I can't imagine that there is anything that would restrict the state legislature from enacting its own policy. We have 18 states that have done this. But what the consequence is for the institutions and their participation in NCAA would be another question that you all would want to have the answer to. But the NCAA has adopted the IOC's approach, which is sport specific. They look to the organizing entity for that sport at the national level, or in the absence of that, they just go to the international sport organization.
Well, I guess I think one of the bills actually creates a cause of action against the NCAA if their rules conflict with this. So would that more likely than not cause the NCAA to say, guess Missouri schools aren't part of us anymore,
I'm sorry,
otherwise they would risk lawsuits?
Probably anything is possible at that point.
All right, thanks.
I'm not prepared to answer that.
Perhaps there'll be someone
happy to
that
try to research that. I have at least one contact at NCAA, but
okay, thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Any other witnesses in opposition? Seeing one, please come forward and proceed when ready.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Ashley Quinn. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm here both as an individual, as a parent, as a trans person myself, as a parent of a trans foster youth. Thank you, Representative Quaid, for pointing out our foster kids in this state, and also as a religious leader with National Avenue Christian Church in Springfield, Missouri. I just add, I think that these bills basically just seek to erase trans children from our schools, from school sports, from existing, and that denies them their God-given dignity, and I think that is highly problematic. I also think, like, we've referenced the policies that the Olympics have, that the NCAA has. Like, there's very possibly a 4-year-old Olympic quality transgender little girl out somewhere in Missouri or somewhere in wherever she is, and laws like this are trying to tell her that she doesn't get to play soccer. If you think soccer is the best sport, I'm not going to argue with that, or with whatever her sport would be. And I can appreciate that there might be some kind of some reasoning to try to say, you know, that trans people aren't like dominating the sports, and so we don't need to worry about this biological advantage or something like that. But it's not to say that we're all losers either. And so I think that, and I think that if you look at the scholarship scenario, that potentially trans girls are robbing cisgender girls of the opportunity to get a college scholarship. Should we make maybe college more accessible to all students so that they don't have to compete in a sport in order to have access to education? That seems to make a lot more sense to me than saying that, and then prioritizing one over the other. Because if you're going to say that trans girls shouldn't have those opportunities at those scholarships, only cisgender girls should have those opportunities, then you're denying the trans girls the very same opportunity for scholarships that you're saying it would be unfair to deny to the cisgender girls. So it just logically, it doesn't make any sense. And from a perspective of, like, what do we want? More people getting more education, great, let's do that, and let's, like, take whether or not you're good at a sport out of the equation. So I just, to folks who, I've heard other people testifying about, like, God's word's influence in things. As a Christian, I full-heartedly believe in the division of church and state, and I don't think that our religion should have anything to do with what our laws are. But at the same time, there's nothing in the Bible that says that I'm any less of a person for being transgender than anybody else is. So for anyone who has heard that from someone trying to speak on behalf of God, I'd just like to say that's not the whole story.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Representative Weber.
Thank you so much for giving that last piece of testimony. Well, everything, but the last piece especially, because I wanted to say, you know, I grew up in a very, very conservative upbringing in rural Kansas. And in high school, I had one of my friends come out as a lesbian. I didn't want to tell my mom that my best friend was a lesbian because I was afraid that she was going to force me to not hang out with her anymore. When I finally did tell my mom that Ashley, my friend, came out as a lesbian.
Ashley's a good name, by the way.
My mom made the comment and said, is she okay? Not meaning, is she okay? Meaning, is she getting attacked by other people? She was worried about the community coming out and hurting her because she realized we live in a very rural area. And she told me to relay to Ashley that she has a home here. If there's anything wrong or anything happening, that she's always welcome at our house no matter what. And when I asked my mom, because then the Catholic faith was not for LGBTQIA, I mentioned that to her. She made a comment and said, I'm a Christian and we love all. No matter what you look like, who you are, we love you nonstop. And so I just want to say thank you for that little bit.
Thank you. And to the note of, I mean, to the statistics and things and the trends towards suicidal ideation that have been mentioned before. I mean, what your mom and what your family did for your friend saved her life in some way. You know, I mean, that's what, just having one supportive adult in your life, whether that's a coach or a teacher or a family friend or whatever, that can make a huge difference in a kid's life. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, is there anyone else testify in opposition to these bills? Seeing none, and just since we've had a few more people come in, I just want to ask real quick, is there anyone here who wanted to testify in support but did not get an opportunity to do that yet? Okay, seeing none, is there anyone here to testify for these bills for informational purposes only? Seeing none. Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute reset before we take on that correction. We're going to stand at ease for 15 minutes. So we will reconvene around 8:15.
Is it you? Oh, here. Would you sit next to us? Yeah. While we're waiting to start again, if you're going to be testifying, make sure you fill out a form and put it in the box.
Here, I'll go ahead and give Is it okay that I put mine for the next bills on top of those?
Yep, that